Okay, I'm going to broadcast live now.
Okay, good evening. Welcome to the Costa Mesa Planning Commission meeting for Wednesday, May 27th, 2020. I call the meeting to order. In order to minimize the spread of the COVID-19 virus, Governor Newsom has issued executive orders that temporarily suspend requirements of the Brown Act, which allows Planning Commission members to attend Planning Commission meetings telephonically. Given the health risks associated with COVID-19, the City Council chambers will be closed to the public until further notice. If you'd like to participate in this meeting, you can participate via the following options. You are strongly encouraged to observe the Planning Commission meetings live on Costa Mesa TV, Spectrum Channel 3, and ATT Uverse Channel 99, and online at youtube.com/Costa Mesa TV. This Zoom webinar is also another way you can participate. You can click on the link that is part of the agenda for tonight's meeting that is on the city's website and follow the login instructions with respect to the webinar ID and the password. You can also participate via telephone by calling 1-669-900-6833. Again, that's 1-669-900-6833. And the webinar ID is also on the city's agenda, as well as the password. When the item that you wish to speak about is introduced, you may speak by pressing *9 and wait to be recognized. With that, I will ask that we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance of our nation's flag. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Brenda, would you call the roll, please?
Actually, Ms. Colgan is going to do that.
Okay, Julie, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Chair D'Erico?
Here.
Vice Chair Harlan is absent. Commissioner Colbert?
Present.
Commissioner Russell?
Here.
Commissioner Perkins?
Here.
Commissioner Zick?
Here.
And Commissioner Torje?
Here.
Okay, thank you very much. On our agenda tonight, we have no announcements and presentations. This brings us to public comment. All those wishing to speak on matters not on tonight's agenda, you will have had the opportunity to send in an email. Also, the call-in number that I mentioned to you on in my previous statement on the agenda is another way that you can participate in public comment tonight. Ms. Green, do we have any public comments?
Ms. Colgan, I believe you have one public comment to read.
Yes, that's correct. This
Okay,
is from Bruce Krockman. Once again, I would like to commend you and city staff for finding alternative methods of public participation during the COVID-19 pandemic. I hope that the commission continues to provide these alternative methods of participation even after the public is generally allowed to return to the meetings for those members of the public that may not be able to attend meetings in person. Thank you.
And if any members of the public would like to speak on items not on the agenda, could you please raise your hand now? Mr. Chair, we see no other people to speak.
Okay, and I see that as well. So we'll close the public comment. This brings us to Planning Commissioner comments. Commissioner Torje, do you have any comments tonight?
just want to continue to thank the staff for all their work behind the scenes and making sure that we have productive and effective meetings and public meetings. I know it's been a lot of work. I'm really appreciative, and I also want to thank members of the City of Costa Mesa for all the great work in protecting people by wearing masks and shopping locally and thinking about ways to support our local economy, and just continue to think about those affected by both economically and health-wise by the situation we're in now.
Okay, thank you very much. Commissioner Colbert.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. I do have a couple of comments. I just want to reiterate my support and appreciation for staff's commitment to ensuring that the public's voice is heard on matters related to the commission and also council. And also just your efforts to commitment to reading out every public comment as you did so eloquently in our previous meeting. And also just wishing everybody to stay safe and healthy during COVID-19. Today is a pretty weighty day for me, as while we think about the issues that are affecting our country nationwide regarding COVID-19, there's also a number of issues facing African-American communities across the country in relation to police departments and police brutality and challenges. And so I just want to bring humanity to those instances of individuals who have since COVID been either shot and killed by police or succumbed to some type of violence in their community. I present this because the way people experience community, the way people experience environments, the way people experience different landscapes is all related to how we plan communities, where we think people should be, where we put things in, and how people just experience this, the day-to-day landscape. It determines who belongs, it determines who doesn't. And oftentimes, and specifically in communities that are not predominantly Black or not very diverse, those experiences can look very different for people of color and how we experience the city services, et cetera. And so I just think about this as I read the general plan. How do I fit, and how do people that look like me fit within this perspective? I think about this when I'm thinking about the housing element and people that are experiencing, inequality or inequity, how they experience it. So it just is something that I think is important. Ahmaud Arbery, just running around his community, experienced this. Breonna Taylor being asleep at her house, experienced this. And now George Floyd. And I pray that the Costa Mesa community never experiences any issues like this, but I also just implore us to be more thoughtful and how we engage other humans, and how we engage people that live and work next to us, our neighbors. And so, while tonight I'm thinking about all three of them and so many other countless individuals who we all seen the stories on any platform, that we don't have a hashtag here in Costa Mesa. And that requires a lot of prior planning, a lot of issues of bias training and sensitivity training for our police departments and things of that nature. So while I'm thinking about our general plan, I think how that general plan, when it incorporates different communities, and as our community continues to grow and become more diverse, what that looks like and how people experience those spaces. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Colbert. Very nice remarks, and I agree completely. Commissioner Russell.
I have no comments after that, no.
Okay. Commissioner Zick.
I have several comments. I want to echo the comments made by Commissioner Tourget relative to the I'll say the Costa Mesa message in terms of response to COVID and the need to support the community and in particular community businesses. It's a message you're hearing a lot. It's a message you're going to hear frequently. And it's because it's an important message, and I appreciate that Commissioner Tourget mentioned that. I'm also particularly struck and impressed by Commissioner Colbert's comments. It's not the first time he's helped remind us of differences in the community. And I think there's something particularly important and not obvious to many people when the whole topic of diversity comes up. Because the first thing that people tend to think about is, well, if you don't look like me, you're different. And if you do look like me, you're the same. And neither of those is true. They're both bad assumptions. And I think, we see that in just the way certain decision-making bodies reach decisions. People can be at polar opposites of an issue and I'd say look identical. So diversity isn't just what you look like. It's the whole collection of life experiences that you bring to the table. And it's pretty exciting to see that kind of diversity here at the Planning Commission. Because if one person had all the answers, all of you could just log off and just leave me with the mic, right? So, okay, so that was a little bit of levity. The other thing I wanted to echo was Bruce's comment about the public participation, and in particular the city's effort to help provide avenues for continued participation by the public. I'll sound a little bit like a broken record though on this next point, and that is that just as important as the public participation is, I think even more important is public awareness of what's going on. I've mentioned it to, in this venue that if people want to know what is coming up on the Planning Commission agenda or City Council, you can subscribe on the city's website, automatically get emails the moment that agendas and staff reports are made public. That gives you awareness as to what's going on. Surprised and maybe disappointed would be too strong a word, but when I meet with somebody who's concerned about a particular aspect of a project in one part of the city, and when I'm meeting with them, I'll say, hey, what do you think of this other project that we're currently looking at or thinking about? And frequently I'll hear, well, I don't really know anything about that. Haven't really heard. And yet it's huge. And so then I'm meeting with somebody else about their project. And I said, well, what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? And I don't blame people for not being as aware as obviously we are, because we're sitting in the chairs doing the job. But I think that somehow if we can figure out a way to increase public awareness, I think we'd be going a long way towards serving the community better. In the last two council meetings, they're talking about trying to, figure out, well, what does the public think about this big topic? Or what does the, public think about that big topic? If a large part of the public is unaware of any of these things going on, doing a straw man poll really doesn't get you anything meaningful. So somehow, if we can increase the public awareness, then I think we have a shot of increasing the public engagement and the participation, because the more people that are involved, generally, the better the end result. So thank you for listening to me, and I appreciate everyone who's attending this public meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Perkins.
Great, thank you very much, and excellent comments here by everyone that I would agree with. I wanted to talk a little bit about coronavirus here in Orange County and think about what we as a planning commission can maybe do to help with Costa Mesa reopening, and maybe even think about a future agenda item that I would maybe like to suggest. To speak about coronavirus, the running 7-day average of new infections of coronavirus cases here in Orange County has been increasing for weeks now and hit its highest point of all time yesterday. We've had more people die in the last 2 weeks here in Orange County than in the first month and a half combined. I certainly will respect the decision of our civic leaders and our health departments. We're working very hard on this, but I think there's a very real possibility that we are reopening too quickly. I know many people are suffering economically, but speaking as a biologist, the virus does not care about economic indicators. It does not care how much you'd like to go back to the way it was. If an infectious person exhales virions in a room with uninfected, non-immune people, those people will be at high risk of becoming infected. A lot of my friends and family are in high risk groups for this disease, and I'm already seeing them be pressured into going out and doing activities that expose them to risk. I worry for their safety, and if we are not very careful, people will die unnecessarily. To bring this back to economics and planning, dead people don't spend money, and people afraid for their lives are not going to spend money in anything like the ways they once did. Given that around 40% of cases are asymptomatic, and we've got data from the UK showing that only 20 to 30% of people exhibit a fever before being diagnosed, things like checking for symptoms and fevers do little to keep people safe as businesses reopen. We have good data showing that the virus is most likely to spread when people spend extended periods of time together in enclosed spaces. Limitations on number of people's indoor at once, say limiting the number of active tables in a restaurant, can help, but also reduce the economic viability of most businesses. Thus, places like restaurants and most businesses need to reimagine how they can have employees and customers safely be present for extended periods of time, and our existing city procedures, some of which we here implement, may be getting in the way of this. We need to explore as many solutions as we can, but one solution I'd like to highlight is emerging across the country, allowing businesses to expand into outdoor spaces. Allowing restaurants to set up tables outside, shops to set up outdoor markets, allows employees and customers to interact in ways that minimize the risk of disease transmission due to the high likelihood of transmission indoors. But there's a major hurdle. Most of our streets, which are our public spaces, are allocated to motor vehicle transport and storage. Is now really the time when we want to use our public spaces to prioritize fast and efficient movement and storage of cars and trucks and other motor vehicles? Or do we want to prioritize using that space to keep people safe and to help local businesses recover and to help our community recover? I would thus like to ask if my fellow commissioners would support a motion that the Planning Commission at its next meeting agendize discussing recommendations that we could make to the City Council to support local business recovery. This is a very broad topic, and I'd love to hear my colleagues and the public's ideas on this. From my perspective, as based on what I just said, I'd like this to include things like, I believe the City Council may even be hearing, temporarily expanding businesses to expand into on-street or off-street parking, but also to allow businesses to expand into roadways via temporary lane or street closures, which are being done across the country successfully, and facilitating residents walking or biking to local businesses through temporary extended sidewalks through slow streets. So that is my request, and I would be interested to hear what my colleagues feel of that request. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Perkins. And you did share some information with me about this previously. And conceptually, I love the idea of using public spaces outdoors to kind of transition our way out of the COVID-19 pandemic and to also allow restaurants to operate and have diners outdoors and indoors with spacing. So rather than get into and because it really isn't on the agenda tonight, I would not mind a presentation by staff at all. I don't know that the next meeting is, I'll defer to Mr. Curtis, if it's too quick to pull something together. Certainly, I'm sure he's aware and Jennifer's aware, the rest of the planning staff is aware as what other jurisdictions are doing in this regard. I'm all open for exploring it. I think it's a terrific idea. And I think we need to have kind of an overall understanding of how we would implement it, what parts of town is it feasible and not feasible, those kinds of things. But I'm all on board with you in that regard. If any other commissioner wants to weigh in, but I'll defer to Mr. Curtis on how soon we could do something with that.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So first of all, Commissioner Perkins references a little bit. At the next council meeting, city council meeting next Tuesday, we will have an item on this specific issue going to the city council. We will be proposing, and it may even be implemented in advance of that, the city council essentially ratifying it, but it'll be recommending ways for particularly restaurants to reestablish previous capacities that they will have lost through social distancing and other measures. We're looking at kind of a tiered approach where the lowest hanging fruit and the least requirements, matter of fact, it would just be by right, would be using private properties that are private open spaces, piazzas and plazas and any other areas where seating can be provided. The next step in the process that we're recommending is with slight staff review and approval is within private parking areas, private parking lots. And then the third area is out into the public spaces. So that'll be going to the city council on Tuesday for their consideration or its consideration. We could have something back for discussion purposes, maybe report out city council, and also do a report out of some of the other activities occurring in the community with economic development and business reopenings. We could report that out at your next meeting if it's the desire of the commission.
I would say if you can do that, I'm on board. What if the other commissioners, Commissioner Zick, you've got your hand up if you'd like to weigh in?
Yeah, so I think that's a great idea. I've got one question. In a situation, let's say, where a restaurant had a plan or a desire to expand out into their parking lot, and the details of their plan and the logistics of that were somehow, by some process, deemed to be workable. My question is this: if that's something that we wanted to allow on some temporary basis, like 6 months or 3 months or something like that, would the vehicle for approving that kind of a use be a, I guess it wouldn't be a conditional use permit. Maybe my question is, what would the vehicle be that would allow for that kind of a deviation on a short-term basis?
So Barry, you can go ahead and answer, but I think that's probably what some of the things they'll present to us when they come back with us. But if you want to take a short shot at that, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Zick, that is somewhat to be worked out by the city council at their direction. However, what we are recommending is we're looking at this, and absolutely what you said is what we're looking at. We're looking at a short-term temporary solution. We are recommending 6 months because I don't see circumstances in the next 6 months changing dramatically enough that we're going to have crammed restaurant spaces again. And we're also allowing the room for potential extensions if the world, depending on what the world looks like as we get towards 6 months out. But what we're looking at doing, we're looking at this as trying to assist these restaurants that are, a lot of them just kind of hanging on at this point by their fingernails. We're looking at trying to do this as expeditiously as possible. So we're recommending for most of these some level of administrative review and not bringing it to the Planning Commission and or even zoning administrator. But the city council may determine otherwise, that they may want some additional decision-making feedback in that. Staff's thought was, because it's a relatively short duration, aimed really at kind of emergency basis to help our businesses weather this storm, that we would try to do it as quickly as possible and cut out as many of the steps as normally would be required.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Torje.
I would just say that I would be in support of a presentation like this. It's been interesting to see pop up in other cities. I think our city is ripe for that as well. So I would support that, and I'm glad to hear that's an option for us at the next meeting.
Okay, great. So I don't see any other commissioners raise their hand. I agree. I in fact, when Commissioner Perkins contacted me by email about this, I was told him to keep up the good work and kind of, if you want to keep doing the legwork and staying out in front of this, because I'm frying other fish right now. But I think even longer term, as we get into specific plan updates, when we start looking at how outdoor dining may integrate into complete street design concepts, I think we're going to be living our lives a lot more outdoors in years to come because of something like this, but only because I think we're going to be in our automobiles less too, and getting to restaurants and cafes and places in different ways where we might not need as much parking and we can have more tables outside. So Commissioner Perkins, I appreciate bringing it up, and I look forward to the presentation. Okay, so beyond that, I don't have any comments tonight for commissioner comments. So that will take us to the consent calendar. All matters listed under the consent calendar are considered to be routine and will be acted upon in one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless members of the Planning Commission, staff, or the public request specific items to be discussed and or removed from the consent calendar for discussion. Members of the public desiring to comment on a consent calendar item were advised to submit your comment via email at pcpubliccomments@costamesa.ca.gov prior to the start of the consent calendar period. Commissioners, we have several items on the consent calendar tonight, several meeting minutes, also 2019 annual review of the Costa Mesa 2015-2035 general plan, and the general plan conformity resolution for the city of Costa Mesa for the 1-year and 5-year CIP programs. Are there any members of the public who wish to pull any of the consent calendar items? If you're in the attendee box, you can click raise your hand. I don't see anybody doing that. Commissioners, anybody wishing to pull any of the items tonight?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Zick.
items number 5 and 6, I would be interested in pulling.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, so I will move approval of the balance of the consent calendar, except I will be abstaining on consent calendar item number 3, minutes for the meeting of February 10th. I did not attend that meeting. Commissioners, any other abstentions on the consent calendar? Commissioner Georget.
Yes, Chair. I will be abstaining from item number 2. I was absent on the February 24th Planning Commission meeting.
Okay, so I move the balance of the consent calendar with those abstentions. Is there a second?
So I'll second Perkins.
Okay, seconded by Commissioner Perkins. Julie, please call the roll.
That motion carried 6-0 with Vice Chair Harlan absent and with abstentions as noted for the record.
Did you call the roll?
Oh, so sorry. I
Okay.
apologize. Jumped ahead. Chair DeErkel.
That's how I run my house. You really don't get a vote. Go ahead. Yes.
Commissioner Colbert.
Yes.
Commissioner Perkins.
Yes.
Commissioner Russell.
Yes.
Commissioner Zick.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so then I will then,
Commissioner Today is yes.
sorry, what?
Commissioner Torje voted yes.
Okay. So motion carried 6-0 with Vice Chair Harlan absent and with abstentions as noted for the record.
Okay, so that takes us to consent calendar item number 5. Commissioner Zick, which is the annual review of the Costa Mesa 2015-35 general plan. Do you need a staff presentation, Commissioner Zick, or do you have some questions?
No, I just had a couple of questions, Mr. Chairman.
Hey, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. So the reason I pulled this was kind of for 2 reasons. One is I did have a couple of questions, but the other is because although I recognize this is an annual process and from that standpoint might be considered routine, the fact that it is only once a year, I think makes it worthy of some attention given the gravity of the topic and quite frankly, given the extent of resources of staff time that goes into putting it together. I think if we did not give this some amount of attention commensurate with that level of effort, I think you run the risk of the effort not being as meaningful, even given the best professionals that we have. It's easy to not take something seriously if no one else takes it seriously. So the couple of questions I have, and I'm looking, starting just on page 1 of the staff report, there's a bulletized list of matters that this update is intended to cover. And these all sound very, very important, and they're distilled down. The bullet points are distilled down, I think, into very clearly understandable elements. And one challenge that I had, so this is a comment and then I'll get to my question. One challenge that I had is it was not obvious to me how I was able to view these bullet points in some kind of a summary or executive summary type of a report. As I thumbed through the staff report and the documentation, quite frankly, I just couldn't get my arms around these highlights. There was one in particular on the second page of the staff report, and I call it bullet point number 6. So it's actually the top bullet point on page 2. And it refers to a list of sites rezoned to accommodate the city's share of regional housing need. And I recognize that this, when we're talking about RENA, here we're talking about the previous or the existing active cycle, not the upcoming cycle. But relative to this list of sites rezoned to accommodate the city's share, could somebody on staff direct me to where I would find that list of sites?
Yes. Either Mr. Curtis or Mr. Arias.
Yes. So specifically, that bullet point is referencing the annual progress report forms table C. And so specific for Costa Mesa, we don't have any sites that are identified.
Oh, okay. That's a good answer. That would maybe explain why I couldn't find it.
Mr. Zick, that may be because our current RENA number is 2. So we don't need a huge amount of land to achieve that.
But that's fair. I was curious to see how something like this was reported, as I'm anticipating, and I'm sure others are as well, how this might be looking in the future. And that takes me a little bit to my second question. And I'm looking at handwritten page 5 of the report. And this is in the table 1 annual review. And there's an element here, one of the land use elements that I've been particularly interested in, and I've raised it previously. And my question, and this is relative to both our stated desire here to increase the ratio of ownership housing relative to rental housing, since our city is upside down in that ratio relative to surrounding cities. So my question is, I recognize there's going to be some work on the housing element coming up. Can somebody explain to me in very broad brush terms kind of what that looks like, what that process is, how things like this will be considered or folded into that? And maybe a little bit of what the timing of that is, so I can kind of maybe calibrate my expectations.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Zick. The housing element is required to be updated by October of 2021. We have just completed a request for proposals for a consulting firm to help the city prepare the housing element update, which we're, I believe, bringing the contract to City Council ideally on the second meeting in June. We will start a comprehensive process, initially start off internally working staff with the consultant to understand the process that the city wants to undertake. We will go through a detailed planning process, which includes, some significant public outreach and planning efforts with the community and with the commission, with the city council, before ultimately the city council ultimately adopts the updated housing element at the end of next year. Regarding this, there'll be part of the process will be obviously determining how and the best approach to address the RENA within the community. That's going to be looking at existing general plan and zoning designations and capacity within those to determine what we could provide with the existing entitlements and existing approvals. And then we will look at what's needed to do the delta to accomplish what's required to meet the RENA. So it may be that some of these existing, these you're preferencing here are land use element items. Some of these may need to be changed, but initially be looking at the housing element. It will come up with its own goals and objectives and policies to implement the housing element. And then we will also look at the rest of the general plan, particularly land use element, maybe a couple others as well. And additional modifications may be necessary to accommodate the housing element. One of the things I know we've talked about is an anticipated need to probably look at changing general plan designations and densities and things in certain areas of the city to accommodate 11,700 unit RENA. The actual extent of that is something that, you know, obviously we still need to complete, but so there will be changes to this. The table you're referring to is referring to land use element objectives and policies. Those will need to be relooked at in context of what's being proposed to the housing element to make sure our land use element is consistent and allows us to accommodate and achieve the housing element goals.
Is that's a great explanation. I appreciate that. Is the Planning Commission involved in either in some aspect of the development of the housing element update? Are they involved in the review of I'll say a final version of that? To what extent is the Planning Commission involved in that process at all?
Commissioner, particularly given the large RENA that we're looking at for the next cycle, I think it's going to be imperative that the Planning Commission be very involved in this process from almost the very beginning. So to answer your question, yes, the Planning Commission will be involved. We'll be looking at workshops. We'll be looking at introducing items to the Planning Commission throughout the process. You know, as the chairman indicated, the last RENA was 2. I don't know if the Planning Commission was heavily involved. They may have been, but you know, as far as a lot of land use decisions, theoretically, you don't need to get too deep into that. But this one is going to be, you know, some wholesale looking at the city to decide what makes sense to try to go forward in implementing the regional housing needs assessment that was allocated.
Well, thank you very much, and I very much look forward to being involved in that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Torje has her hand up, and then Commissioner Colbert, and then Commissioner Perkins.
Yes, thank you. I appreciated Commissioner's questions about the RENA numbers in particular, and wanted to just ask, as we're considering a consultant and looking at public outreach, to make sure that the Planning Commission has a schedule to understand where the Planning Commission will be asked for input as part of the process. I think earlier better than later would be great, just to understand specifically what we'll be asked to provide input on, and if there are opportunities for joint study sessions between City Council and Planning Commission, that would be great. And I'm incredibly interested in this as well, and so I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it tonight.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Colbert?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of questions regarding handwritten page 6, and I think I can couple this question, handwritten page 13. And so on element number 2.6, it says encouraged increase private market investment in declining or deteriorating neighborhoods. And then on 13 for land use 6.5, encourage revitalization of existing older commercial or industrial areas in the west side with new mixed use development consisting of ownership, housing stock, and live work units. I wanted to understand how the city attempts or plans to identify which areas, and especially as it relates to industrial and commercial areas, that we will diversify in some way in terms of live work units and how we will select those areas. I think that was a really big part of One Metro West, and might continue to plague us. So I just wanted to kind of understand how we're seeking to select those parcels.
Okay, anybody want to take want to take a crack at that? Nobody's
Sure.
jumping on board.
I can take a crack and then
Okay.
Barry has anything to add, great. When we look at implementing these general plan policies and objectives, what we're looking at is essentially the city has adopted urban plans and specific plans in some instances, identifying areas of the city where redevelopment of older commercial and industrial areas or underutilized areas, and essentially the adoption of those plans and the objectives of those plans is to encourage investment in the community and to turn over properties that have been underutilized for purposes of residential development. The West Side plans are a good example. In some cases, the specific plans that the city has adopted as well, the North Costa Mesa specific plan, for example. So essentially the city has taken these broader general plan goals and adopted plans that cover specific areas of the city where we envision these changes occurring.
Okay, my question following that is, I think we have about 15 months based off of Mr. Curtis's response on the timeline for getting our arena plan together and the housing element together, which is really kind of short. It's coming up on us really fast. But in terms of our pipeline and thinking about, and we can't predict the future, but are there any major housing projects that we foresee coming towards the commission? And I ask that because I would be very hesitant moving forward for a project like a One Metro West to kind of catch us off guard again. And I say catch us off guard because we didn't have a plan in terms of an affordable housing plan, and this housing element kind of needed to be updated, and we were kind of in the middle of it. I feel like they kind of caught us in the middle of that process and we were working through it, and we had to really deal with it. Whereas if we had a concrete plan in place, we could have been more thoughtful in understanding the direction that we were going. So I hope you caught the question at the beginning. Honestly.
Sure. So we are in the previous housing element cycle, and you are correct that we're sort of gearing up for the next housing element cycle starting in 2021. We don't have projects in the pipeline in terms of large residential applications that have been submitted. You've seen a lot of those larger applications move forward recently in terms of, so Ford Road, for example, the plant in Sobeka, for example, that had a mixed use component and a residential component. One Metro West is obviously still under review. We have a number of smaller projects that are sort of 10 units or less. That's sort of how we categorize smaller versus larger projects. So many small lot projects have gone through the process. Obviously a number of accessory dwelling units and those types of smaller residential proposals. But in terms of large projects, we don't have anything in the pipeline as of now.
Okay, thank you. And my final question is related to, I think the data points that we received on what we've built thus far in terms of our income levels. And I think the above moderate seems to be kind of leading the way. And I know Mr. Curtis spoke about our affordable housing plan and how that may or may not be implemented. But I wanted to understand how we plan to attract developers as it relates to like the very low moderate, or encourage them to build. Will that come from the housing element, specifically addressing affordable housing, or how do we try to increase our numbers in those areas?
Commissioner Colbert, it's multifaceted. One will be the inclusionary housing program that we've discussed previously, which would require the provision of affordable housing in conjunction with market rate housing. We will also work with nonprofit developers, for the planned reuse of Fairview being one of those where the state has an interest in affordable housing. We will also be working, as I said, with nonprofit developers in the city, looking at opportunities to build affordable housing projects within the city, taking advantage of some of the tools that the state allows, such as density bonuses and other tools that are now available under several of the housing legislation that came out late last year. So it'll be kind of a combination of gaining affordable housing through market rate housing, That could potentially be inclusionary literally within the projects like One Metro West was proposing. On smaller projects where that's not always feasible, it could be the payment of an in lieu fee. And then we use that funds to leverage with a nonprofit developer to develop affordable housing in the city. So those are a couple of the ways we'll be looking at. There'll probably be others as well.
Mr. Chairman, may I, you bring up a good point.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Curtis, when you say the in lieu fee, that was something that's important as well, because I'm not sure if that will be allowed here, but for the 10 units left, I definitely get that projects won't pencil if we have an affordable housing piece associated with it. But for our larger projects, will there be an opportunity for in lieu fees there? Because I just don't want us to have this goal and then people just opt out just by signing a check.
Commissioner Colbert, normally what cities will do is allow it for the smaller projects. If the city truly wants inclusionary housing, which is intermixed with market rate housing, you do not allow projects over a certain size to opt out of that. I've seen cities that have, Costa Mesa being mainly flat, this isn't really an issue, but I've seen cities with hilly areas and things where it's more costly to develop, allowing density or allowing in lieu fees in certain areas of the city, even though a project might be a large project. But we would not be recommending that. The last one, the only one of these I've ever put together, we allowed projects of 50 units or less to opt out with an in lieu fee. But I don't know what we'll be proposing in Costa Mesa, but something along those lines, 25 to 50 units or fewer would be potentially exempt and subject to a fee. Things that larger than that would have to provide the units in conjunction with the development.
Okay, Commissioner Perkins, and then I see your hand still up. Commissioner Torje, you have more questions? Okay, very good. Commissioner Perkins.
Great, thank you. So overall, this report has been very interesting to read over. And since I'm new to this group, this is the first year I'm seeing this general report. I know many of you guys have seen this before. I'm sort of coming at this almost like a little bit like a faculty member, sort of trying to sort of grade a paper, if you will. I grade papers for a living. And so when I look at a lot of areas of this report, like say pages 14 and 15, I see fantastic levels of detail. When we're looking at all of these policies and looking at, how are we going about meeting them seems to be the goal of this report. But in each one of these areas, and on the end of page 15, we see it, there are parts of the report where we haven't included very many details, and often just saying vaguely like ongoing, like LU 7.5, it's just an ongoing. And this reminds me a little bit of what happens when like students who tell me they've worked hard to study for an exam, and I ask them, hey, what have you done? And they just say, well, I studied. Okay, how did you study? What did you do to study, right? It feels like, in a lot of this, we're asking, how did we actually go about doing this? And simply saying ongoing doesn't feel like a detailed answer. And I totally understand that we have dozens, hundreds, maybe even more than 1,000 goals in here and policies. Certainly some of those will fall into ongoing. The land use, the one that's at the first of this policy, I think you have 19% of their items listed are ongoing. Conservation has 9 ongoings. I did count. They have 24%. Safety has 11, 29% of theirs. But when I got to the circulation element, and this is what I wanted to ask if this is something we should be concerned about, 145 of their policies were listed as either ongoing or to be implemented. That was 73% of their items there. And so as just sort of an example, pages 24 to 25, and it's most of circulation, 24 to 25, almost every single thing is just ongoing, period, with no details. Is this, again, I'm new here. I don't have a grading rubric for this assignment, to go back to the faculty analogy. My question for staff is this prevalence of ongoing with no details in some areas of the report? It's mainly in circulation, I think growth management and noise, or where it's above 40%. Is this something that we should be concerned with or sort of noting, or is this sort of standard for this type of report?
Mr. Arias or Ms. Lee, do you want to handle that?
Mr. Chairman, I can.
Or Mr. Sethuraman. Welcome, sir.
So Commissioner Perkins, a lot of those policies, many of them are things like ensure that we coordinate with OCTA, for example, or promote is maintain balance between land use and circulation. I mean, things like that, which, I mean, policies that are that's something that we normally do on our day-to-day life. So support OCTA, support and participate with OCTAs, work with OCTA on bus turnouts, coordinate with OCTA on improved transit. I mean, so these are, so there isn't specific things that we can highlight, except saying that, yeah, that's what we do on our day-to-day operations. There are of course some of them that are listed ongoing. We could probably go and add some more detail to that. Definitely that we can look into it in the next go around. But when it says encourage these things or ensure some things, I mean, those are the things that we have to just say it's ongoing.
Okay.
I don't know if Justin, I saw Justin with his hand up. Yeah, so again, I'm not necessarily saying it's the wrong thing. I understand certainly some of them are. I guess I'm just concerned. I just wanted to see, is that sort of standard in this kind of a report? That's really what I'm looking for. So
I can add as well, Commissioner Perkins. Really, it is standard to see ongoing in a certain portion of the goals, objectives, and policies, because as Raja mentioned, some of them lend themselves to sort of day-to-day ongoing effort. Having said that, we do try to put as much detail as possible in each one. So we will take another look and ensure that we're providing a great level of detail as much as we can in each one of these. Obviously, as you said, there are hundreds of goals and policies. The other reason that we might put ongoing is because over a 20-year implementation period for the general plan, each year, we may or may not touch every one of those goals, objectives, and policies. And so the effort is ongoing, although we haven't got to the point where we have a reportable result. So that would be the other reason that you'll see ongoing in some of these areas. But as Raja mentioned, we will take a look at these and put some more detail in ongoing as much as we can.
thank you very much.
And just if I could just step in for a minute, just in terms of process and what the Planning Commission is asked to do typically in the review of this annual report each year. I totally agree, Commissioner Perkins. It's important to take a broader look, but I think just looking at the government code section, what we're trying to do tonight under 65-400 is to provide a report to the council relative to the bulleted housing issue items, not necessarily circulation element, although they may be intertwined at some point, but just so we don't get mission creep, because I appreciate what we're all looking at, but this report tonight is kind of focused on the housing portion of it. Did you have additional questions, Commissioner Perkins?
I did not. Thank you very much, and that clarifies a lot.
Commissioner Tourget and then Commissioner Zick again.
Hi, thank you very much. I just wanted to bring our attention back to handwritten page 13 that Commissioner Colbert brought up. I always get a little bit concerned when I see development in the west side and underutilized parcels called out in terms of relating it to affordable housing. I think we all need to keep in mind that affordable housing is regional and not local, so there's not a one-to-one replacement. So when units are taken down and people who are lower income or living in lower income neighborhoods are displaced, the housing created for them, developed there is not necessarily for them. And so I want to keep that in mind. And so I just want to ask about land use element 6.5, revitalizing existing older commercial and industrial areas in the west side with new mixed use development. It says in 2019, there were 78 residential units that have been completed. And this is a question that maybe staff can come back with later with an answer if we don't have the answer now. Were all of those units replacing commercial and industrial areas, or were they also replacing residential areas?
These would all be urban plan, commercial or industrial properties.
Okay, so has there been residential units that have replaced residential units?
So this specific policy is looking at existing commercial or industrial properties. So we don't look at the existing industrial or residential properties that get redeveloped.
Okay, so I didn't miss it in here that there isn't a list of whether or not there has been residential replacing residential.
You could potentially be in the big table A or A1, and that's the entire building activity for the year. And that is broken down by entitlements, building permits issued and completed.
And we generally have a summary of sort of overall number of units demolished as well as number of units created. So you can make some inferences there, but it's not a direct correlation. So staff can pull some numbers to answer that question. I don't think we have them this evening, but we're happy to provide them to you offline.
Great, I look forward to that. I think it's important for us to remember that if we're replacing housing in a neighborhood that might be listed by the Cal Screen as a disadvantaged community, and then replace those units with higher and above moderate income housing, we are causing displacement in a community. So I just want to flag that for further conversation, especially as we're moving forward.
Okay,
Thank you for letting me ask my second question.
You bet. Commissioner Zick.
Well, I tell you, it just gets better and better. I'm just so, I should have to pay you to be a part of this. I'm impressed, Commissioner Tourget, with the insight that you just expressed, because it highlighted something that I hadn't really given much thought to. It becomes obvious from your comments that if you give just a little bit of thought to this, you really are going in the opposite direction of increasing affordable housing. If you tear down a dilapidated apartment complex and build a brand new apartment complex or new homes or whatever, because I think what you're saying in some respects, or what we should be keeping in mind, is affordability is a function of subsidized pricing, not as a function of condition or desirability. Because you could look at some of these dilapidated areas that, and that's a stronger word maybe than I should use, but the areas that you might be referring to that would be subject to this kind of development. And in some respects, they're affordable now because you've got people that can afford to live there. But you tear that down, put something in new, put 10% of quote unquote affordable housing in there, and you may have displaced dozens of families. So what a really important point that you raised that we need to keep in mind. The other thing I wanted to also comment on, and again, this is why I so value the diversity of opinion and perspectives that people bring. Because when Commissioner Perkins is looking at these, and I've looked at this too, but it's funny, you look at something, you kind of get used to it, it's like, I wouldn't necessarily compare it to an eyesore, but eventually you don't really see it anymore as an issue or a problem, and you just walk by and you come to accept it. And I think it's a valuable question that Commissioner Perkins raises when he looks at a bunch of things that say ongoing and questions, well, is that good enough? Is that descriptive enough? And I think in some respects, Chairman, brings up a valuable point, and his point is, in so many words, if this satisfies the state, then this meets their need for this report, which is fine. They have a need. This satisfies the need. That's great. But there's another need, and I think this was the one that Commissioner Perkins was kind of poking at, and that is that if we have a goal as a city that we care about, that we've cared enough about to write down, then we should also care enough about that goal to try to achieve it. And to simply say ongoing doesn't really provide any clarity, confidence, or assurance that we're doing anything towards achieving that goal. And I think that Ms. Lee brought up a really good point and it might be something separate of this document, but I think it's an important point, and that's distinguishing between the concept of a goal and something maybe that you would call a vision. You know, if you think of a vision or a mission as one of these things that's a point on the horizon, it's a direction you go. You never intend to get there, but it's sort of like a compass point. It's the direction you're going. A goal is something different in my mind, the way I use the term. And I recall this vividly from years of doing performance reviews and appraisals with employees that worked for me. Somebody puts their goals for the year down. Well, you know good and well if you're a manager that at the end of the year, you're going to be reviewing these goals with an employee and trying to determine and establish in some reasonable and credible way, did they achieve these goals? And if they're not measurable goals, if they're not achievable goals, then it's just a bunch of happy talk. And the person at the end of the year will say, well, look, I worked on all this stuff. And you go, yeah, but I don't really think you got anything done, certainly not compared to these other people. So I think that if we say as a community, we have a goal, to me, that's something that you, by definition, if you're going to use that word, can achieve, meaning you get done. So if you say, for example, in opposition to that, if you have as a desire or a vision to continually work with OCTA and be coordinated with this and by that, that's good. That's an activity. That's a professional responsibility. It's not a goal that you can come back and say, I did it, I didn't do it. I got 80% of it done. So anyway, I just wanted to commend Commissioner Perkins for kind of highlighting that aspect of this report. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for bearing with me.
Thank you. So just to kind of wrap this all up, Commissioner Perkins, I hope you didn't feel like I was discounting what you were saying, because I promise you, I promise all of you, that this housing element cycle that we're going to go through this next go round, the paradigm shift that it represents is going to affect our land use element, is going to affect our circulation element, is going to affect several other elements within the general plan. So all of those big picture items that you were talking about, those goals, are going to be very important to see how that housing element comes together and how it gets implemented. Keeping in mind too that these goals, it may say ongoing, keeping in mind these are goals that are in a 20-year document. It's not a week document, it's not a month document. This is a 20-year document. So it may take 5 years to achieve some of these goals, or it may take 6 months, who knows? So I appreciate what all of you are saying. I promise you the work we're going to be doing over the next 18 months is going to be a heavy, heavy lift. It's going to require a lot of creative thinking. Commissioner Colbert, working in this industry, I can guarantee you there's no big projects coming down. Everybody's waiting to see what everybody's housing elements look like and what what the state legislation looks like. And once they know what the football field looks like, that's when they're going to start playing. So, and then the one other thing I want to throw in, because I feel like we're getting a little far afield, just to keep in mind that ownership versus rental is not something we can control. We can approve a condominium project that has 200 condominiums in it, but we can do nothing to preclude those 200 owners from renting those out. Now, a big apartment owner, let's say the Irvine Company, is one owner of 200 apartments, and they're renting those out. That's true, but keeping in mind that we can't control who owns and who rents. You have a 200 unit condominium project with 200 owners, or a 200 condominium project with one owner or one apartment owner. So it's kind of tough for us to control. I've always asked that question about our upside down nature, and all the land planners that I've talked to said Costa Mesa is incredibly unique in that it's generally coastal, and it's the cheapest real estate between Newport Beach, Huntington Beach, Seal Beach, San Clemente, Dana Point. And so you can get really nice coastal real estate for a lot less money than the surrounding cities, and you can rent them out for a lot of money. And that's what happens. So anyway, I'm gonna make a motion to move staff recommendation on consent calendar item number 5. Is there a second?
Second, I'll second.
Okay, Commissioner Russell, you get the second. Any comments, final comments on that? Yeah, Julie, please call the roll.
Chair Jericho,
Yes.
Commissioner Colbert,
Yes.
Commissioner Perkins,
Yes.
Commissioner Russell,
Yes.
Commissioner Torje,
Yes.
Commissioner Zick.
Yes, thank you.
That motion carried 6-0 with Vice Chair Harlan.
Okay, I got the vote, Julie, but you broke up there a little bit. Okay, consent calendar item number 6, which is general plan conformity resolution for the city of Costa Mesa, 1 year 2020 to 2021 and 5 year 2020 to 2025 CIP program. Commissioner Zick, you have questions.
I did have just a couple. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me start with the simplest question. Could you remind me what the fiscal year is? I think it's something different than the calendar year.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Zick. So the fiscal year is from July 1st through June 30th. So that's our fiscal year. So our fiscal year 2021 starts on July 1st of this year.
Okay, thank you for that. So what we're being given in this report are proposed projects in the capital improvement plan, and we're being asked to certify that they're consistent with and implement the goals, policies, and objectives of the general plan. So here's kind of a slightly unusual question, so if you can maybe help me with this. There's a great variety of projects in this list, and I'm just going to make the assumption that every single one of these projects is in fact consistent with the goals, policies, and objectives of the general plan. Can you give me an idea, an example of a project that would not be in conformance? How, in other words, these are all good guys. Tell me how I would recognize a bad guy.
So Commissioner Zick, whenever we have a project that is not in our general plan, we would actually go through an independent environmental document on that one. So when we go through that process, then you'll know that that's not part of our general plan, either circulation element or any of the other elements, and that need to go through a separate process.
Okay, I think maybe I understand that. So if you had, for example, some roadway project where you were going to be upgrading a road, not maintaining it, but widening it, for example, and if that roadway or portion of the road was not in the circulation plan for that kind of upgrade, then that might be an example of a project that would not be in compliance.
That's right. One other reason why we might actually go through a process is if it involves right-of-way impacts or impacts that were not analyzed in our general plan or recognized in our general plan, then that also falls into that category where we have to go through the environmental review process.
Okay. My next question is, and I'll be referencing the handwritten page 4, the first page of the attachment 2 spreadsheet. And I'll kind of preface the question this way. In my mind, there's a difference between a maintenance cost, an expense cost, and a capital cost that would be subject to some kind of depreciation. And I don't know if that's exactly the distinction and definition used in this the capital improvement program. I suspect maybe it's something similar. But at the top of the handwritten page 4, there's a little note, and it said projects highlighted in yellow are new added projects for 2020 and 2021. In other words, the upcoming year. And the question that I had when I saw that note was, especially given the number of existing projects that are in this report and calendarized out for the next 5 years and beyond. The question that came to my mind was, how in the world do a whole bunch of new projects come along and get priority attention in terms of landing in the upcoming fiscal year budget and pushing out a bunch of other projects that might have been on this list for some period of time? So that's kind of my question. How do so many new projects, I mean, to me, they're pop-ups, but there's so many of them that they almost don't fit any criteria I can think of for a pop-up.
So, Commissioner Zick, and this is for Mr. Chairman, for everyone. So this year's process has been a little unusual in terms of the crisis that we're going through. The projects that are selected are actually a lot fewer than what we normally fund on an annual basis. Many of the projects that are in here are funded using what we call non-restricted funds. So which means, funded with restricted funds. What that means is the general fund portion of the project is very limited. It's only $2.2 million versus last year we had $6.9 million worth of projects. So there are very few projects that got selected for this year. And the projects selected were, the general fund projects were primarily critical safety type of infrastructure projects that are needed. For example, at fire station, we had a water leak that we need to take care of. So that kind of moved up on the list that wasn't there before. But a lot of other projects are actually were funded in the previous year, defunded, and we're asking money back. An example for that is the elevator project, the City Hall elevators. We had funding for it last year. We asked for it. We gave up the funding in April when we went through a process of reducing our general fund expenditures. And now we want to implement that project. Same thing with our parking study. We gave up the money on the parking study and we need to get it back because we need to do the parking study. So a lot of projects that you see here are projects that are routine, the annual citywide projects that we always do every year, or projects that have special grant funding that we received that now we can implement that project, or critical projects that we need to implement based on some updated needs.
So I've heard of the elevator project you mentioned. Caught my attention because I've heard some discussion and maybe even some light-hearted comments about the elevator reliability. And I understand your comment, I think, where you said that maybe at one point it was in the plan, then it was defunded, and now it's coming back. But when I look at that project on this list, which is number 3 on the list, it's not highlighted in yellow. So it doesn't indicate that it is new for 2020 or 2021. And so let me ask the question this way rather than pick at that project.
Yes.
Are you saying that some of these yellow projects were in the capital plan, in the forecast for some period of time in the upcoming 5 years, let's say, and the reason why it's highlighted is because you brought it forward to the current year? Or are some of these yellow projects things we had no conception of the need, and all of a sudden now we do have a need for this project and it's brand new added to the list?
No, I apologize, Commissioner Zick, but can you, the printout that I have doesn't have the highlights. So I'm trying to find out, can you tell me which one, a couple of examples of the highlighted ones, then I can tell you about that.
Well, I'll just give you just one example and it would be number 4. It says corporate yard, UDC and maintenance access cover upgrades.
Yes. So that was a project got added because county health came to our city yard and they said they went through safety checks of our underground diesel tanks, and they said you need to have a containment for that one. So they wrote up a thing that said you need to get it fixed. So that became a project. So there are, as I mentioned, very few safety projects like that got added to the list. So that wasn't in the list before, you're right. So that's the reason why that project is on the list.
Okay, so I just have one more question because I've not, I don't want to kind of have you have to replay what was an excellent presentation yesterday, but I didn't get this question in my mind answered, although you may have answered it in the city council presentation. And now I'm looking at handwritten page 16 of the spreadsheet. And one of the things that jumps out at me is that the grand total for the budget for next year is a little over 13 million. And that for each of the next 4 years, it's 24 to 26 million, significantly higher. And of course, beyond that is a grand total of, maybe it's a wish list, maybe it's real need, maybe it's a combination, $172 million. So my question is this, because I haven't been looking at this on a regular basis. Is $24 million a supportable, affordable budget? Are those realistic totals for projects? Or is that an unaffordable wish list and we're simply going to be kicking the can on 50% of those projects a year from now?
So it is 24 million is on a high side. The maximum, I mean, we have funded in the past when we were even 3-4 years ago, it was in the $20 million range. We were funding our Lions Park process and other big projects were going. So we were in that ballpark. That's not an every time occurrence. So again, we have to go through a process next year to see which of those projects in the next year can actually be implemented, and some of them could be moved out. So at this time, the reason why you see such a big number is because of what happened this year. Usually we are in that $17-18 million range, and this year we are way down. We're in the $13 million range. So that's why you see a little bump in the next year, and things get pushed out like that. The big projects that cause that are the Fire Station 2 replacement and Fire Station 4 reconstruction. So those two are big projects. Those two alone add up to almost $20 million worth of projects in the next 3-4 years. So we have some big projects coming up. Depending on how we get funding lined up, you'll see some years being high, but I would say 17, 18 is more realistic number.
Your answers have been very helpful to me, and thank you very much, Mr. Sethuraman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You bet. Commissioner Perkins.
Great, thank you. So I wanted to, again, being new to the process here, sort of figure out how we're evaluating. I think based on my reading of the staff report and talking to folks, I think I understand it, but I want to find out, our role here is evaluating whether these projects are we really evaluating them based on how useful we think they are, how fiscally wise they think they are? Are we looking at whether they're just in the general plan? So for instance, I saw in the 2021-2022 budget, there's $2.1 million being spent on traffic signal synchronizations. That's almost 10% of the year's CIP budget to reduce the amount of time people spend in their cars, money that could go to parks and police. Am I correct that it would be outside of our purview to question, sort of questioning that, because, the city's goals do include, doing traffic signal synchronization work. So we're not really here to question whether these numbers we think are personally valuable. It's just, are they in the general plan? Is that a correct understanding?
So the 2 points that you see in the 21-22 fiscal year is actually a grant that we received from OCTA for signal synchronization projects on many arterials, including Baker, Placentia, 19, 17. So we have that project, we received that funding. So that's what you see in the 21-22 fiscal year.
Okay, got it.
Commissioner Perkins, if I can weigh in on the purview of the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission's role here is to determine whether or not the capital improvement program and the projects listed in that program are in conformance with the general plan. Traffic signal synchronization is something that is specifically identified in the general plan as a goal, policy, or objective of our circulation element. So we have found it in conformance. Certainly you can provide comments this evening that will be forwarded to the City Council, but the role of the Planning Commission is to determine general plan conformance.
That's what I thought. So, and again, that traffic signal synchronization, you know, I may not personally think that that is worth it, but again, I am just one person and that's not even my role here tonight. So I definitely appreciate that. And I love that it's grant funded. That's great. And they can help reduce traffic and other things. So I guess one thing, so when we're thinking about general plan, I know one thing that we just saw, it was nice that these two items are bookended together, was that the general plan almost has a statement that like can support almost anything. It sort of feels like to some extent. There's some things that obviously can't be, but it feels like, I know from my prior work here on the commission that often when we're looking at general plan, we're looking for, does the sort of preponderance of the general plan support it? You know, are there multiple things in the general plan? And one item that I wanted to bring up in that realm and potentially make a comment in is the Newport Boulevard widening. It's on page 15. And it's a roughly $9.3 million project over the next 4 years. Again, about 10% of the proposed budgets for those years. That, as I understand it, and Mr. Sethuraman might be able to expand on this, it is proposing adding a fourth southbound lane of traffic between 19th and Superior. And I went to the public outreach meeting on this that was held last year, and there wasn't really much improvement for pedestrians, right there. It's a 100-foot wide street. Adding a lane is going to, if anything, make crossing a pedestrian worse. There's a bike lane, a protected bike lane, protected by concrete in the active transportation plan for that road. There was no plans for that. So I just wanted to potentially mention that I'm not sure that Newport Boulevard widening really falls in line with a overall sort of cohesive view of our general plan. We have, you know, circulation goal 1 is to implement streets policies. Conservation goal 4A6 is to enhance bicycling and walking infrastructure. Land use 7.8 is to support the development of pedestrian plazas and gathering places. And if we're widening a road, we're discouraging that. Circulation 7.9, encourage reallocation of roadway rights of way to shared use path and bicycle facilities. Circulation 8.5, utilize complete streets elements as demonstrated. So I guess I just wanted to bring up that one as one that I think might be worth looking at. And again, I'm new to this. Maybe this is completely off base, but I wanted to point out that one as a potential concern, I thought.
Mr. Sethuraman, do you want to address that?
Yes. So, Mr. Commissioner Perkins, since that meeting, so our consultant took the comments that we received at that meeting, and we actually had discussions with council at various forums. Actually, it's not a public meeting, but we did talk to council about what our next steps are. You know, the only option that we had at that point, I mean, you know, we could go and cancel the project. That's one option. But the council direction was to continue the process. That's kind of what we heard. So since we received the comments, our designer actually went through and identified several pedestrian amenities that could be added to the project. While we are saying it's adding a fourth lane, we're trying to minimize the pavement. I mean, it's not significant widening. We're trying to reduce lane widths and accommodate with it as much as possible with staying limits and very minimal widening. And we are adding elements such as new crosswalks at some intersections. We are adding enhanced sidewalks. For example, we are trying to, at 19th and Port, we are to bring out the pedestrian area a little bit further into the street. So we are reducing the crosswalk width, for example, at 19th Street. So we are introducing other elements will help in pedestrian access. Granted, this doesn't add the bicycle lane, but that's because we don't have the right of way to do it. And one thing that I'm offering that you know that could happen down the road when if we can justify based on traffic volumes is the lane can be taken out and repurposed as a bicycle lane at any time if the volumes justify that. So if we show that in the future there is no demand for a fourth lane, you have the room to now change the designation to be a bike lane. So just like what we're doing on Merrimack, be done here. We could do that on both northbound and southbound side. So it gives us those opportunities on the road. It's not a design it's not a project that we are going out for construction. We just want to get through the plans and have them ready. And like I said, it could easily be a bike project on the road because the design is pretty much identical other than striping. The future $9.6 million is purely, most of that would be grant money. There would be no city funds associated with this. Either it's a bike project or it's a roadway project. It doesn't matter. It has to be grant funded. So that's, and we need to have projects in our 5-year plan down the road, because when we apply for grant funding, one of the things that we have to check out is this project on your CIP? You know, not current the 5-year CIP, and we have to say yes, then we are eligible to apply for that grant. So sometimes you see projects in there and you think it's pipe dream, but we need to put that in there because if we ever go after grants, it's good to have it in there.
Okay, so I definitely can understand that. I guess one thing I'd like to sort of wonder about is, like, for the pedestrian amenities, you know, we're dealing with a street that has very high volumes, and so I'd be interested in learning, and maybe this is better offline, what the pedestrian amenities are, because I think that to me sort of is an important decision on what does this fit the our general plan's goals, because the general plan has a lot of things supporting pedestrians. And unless we really work towards that, it feels like just an extra lane doesn't do that.
That's fine. Yeah, we can meet.
Okay, thank you. I guess you actually mentioned one more thing. You mentioned the Merrimack Way project. That actually reminded me, I did not see that in this list. Is that because it's already been funded, or the Merrimack Way bikeway lane construction project?
Yes, Chairman, Commissioner, you're right. It's funded, so it doesn't show up on this list. The the design is now nearly complete, and we are looking to advertise it privately.
Great, thank you. And that is my question and my comment on these projects. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Torje.
So Chairman, I just had a quick clarification. When you mentioned that the bike lane in the future, that the road widening could be turned into a bike lane in the future if there wasn't a demand for cars on that street, is the reason the bike lane, is the reason why the road is being widened right now because there is a demand for it, and we're anticipating that maybe that demand will change in the future? Or what is the purpose of adding that widened lane if it's not for demand?
So Commissioner Torje, many years ago, when we worked on Newport Boulevard, we added a fourth northbound through lane. And even back then, the understanding was at some point we'll come and add the fourth southbound through lane. That's kind of how we got Caltrans to agree as to move forward on just the northbound widening. So the demand for the southbound through lane is there right now. If you look at how the traffic gets backed up at 19th and Newport and other intersections as you go further south. So there is a demand for it. Having said that, there is a potential that the demand would go down. We have to evaluate how we come out of this pandemic. You know, a year or two from now, we'll have a better understanding of where things stand, and if travel patterns are changing, if there are things that we can do down the road. And at the time, if we have a design that we can easily tweak and make it work as a bike lane, that could be implemented. Again, as I mentioned, this is not this project right now is a widening because that's how the grant is. The grant is from Measure M2 Competitive Regional Capacity Program project. So in that particular program, they will only fund projects that aim to add capacity for vehicle traffic. They won't fund bicycle lane project with that kind of funding. So
Did we apply for an ATP grant, or did we only apply for this grant for widening?
This was only applying for the roadway capacity grant. We didn't have an ATP grant at that time. We received this grant actually 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, commissioners, for your questions. Are there any members of the public who are on the participation window who wish to speak to this item? Please click the raise hand button. If not, is there anybody on the telephone, Julia or Brenda, that wants to speak to this?
No, we have no members of the public.
Okay. And seeing nobody in the public participant panel raising their hand, I will go ahead and move to adopt a resolution to find that the city's proposed CIP is in conformance with the 2015-2035 general plan, and find that the general plan conformance finding for the city's proposed CIP is not a project. It is not subject to CEQA. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, seconded by Commissioner Zick. Julie, roll call, please.
Chair Derickle,
Yes.
Commissioner Colbert,
Yes.
Commissioner Perkins,
Yes.
Commissioner Russell,
Yes.
Commissioner Torje.
Yes.
Commissioner Zick.
Yes, thank you.
That motion carried 6-0 with Vice Chair Harlan absent.
Thank you very much. How's everybody doing? Does anybody need a break? If not, we'll just charge on. Everybody looks good? Okay. We'll go to planning hearing, public hearing, item number 1.
Public hearing item number 1, Development and Review 20-02 DR-99-22A4, a request to amend DR-9922 to convert a 9,089 square foot outdoor garden center and 703 square foot screen area into an enclosed building addition to be used for storage at an existing Target retail store located at 3030 Harbor Boulevard. This is a call to report any ex parte communications.
Thank you, Julie. Commissioners, any ex parte communications to report? Raise your hand if you do. Mr. Zick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, I was not contacted by Target or their authorized agent, but I was contacted by a member of the public and met with them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Torje and then Commissioner Russell.
I met with a member of the public, and I was not consulted by Target either.
Okay. Commissioner Russell.
I wasn't contacted by Target. I did have a phone call with a member of the public this morning.
Okay, very good. And Commissioner Colbert.
Same, no Target contact. Member of the public I spoke with this morning.
Okay, and I will report that I've had communication with also a member of the public this afternoon. So with that, Mr. Lee, the floor is yours.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Just making sure that everyone can hear me. If so, I will.
All good.
Yes, thank you.
Then I will begin with the presentation. The application that's before you this evening is a development review for a modification to the original development review from 1999 that allowed for the development of the Costa Mesa Square and the Target retail store. So this particular amendment is with regards to the previous garden center that was located adjacent to Target. This proposal involves the enclosure of the garden center with a new 9,792 square foot area that will be used for storage and warehousing space for the Target store. Now, the original development review, DR 9922, was originally approved by planning staff in early 2000. That approval was eventually upheld by the City Council in April of that year. And one of the primary conditions of approval included a stipulation that any expansions or modifications to the target garden center area would be brought back to the Planning Commission for consideration, which is why this particular application is before you this evening. Other amendments to the original development review included a modification for extended shopping hours during the holiday season, also known as Black Friday, and from that period through basically December Christmas shopping season. So those amendments were subsequently approved in 2011 and 2012. So this image shows the subject site. This is highlighting the target portion of the site, which is approximately 10 acres in size. The overall Costa Mesa square is approximately 20 acres in size. And as you can see in this photograph, the Target store and the garden center, which is at the northerly or uppermost portion of this slide, abuts a single-family residential neighborhood along Shamrock Lane. When this project originally went through the development review process back in 1999, the city received a great deal of input from these neighbors as far as everything from the demolition of the original Fedco store, which existed on this property before Target was built, as well as operating measures, hours of operations, and other issues that the residents felt was necessary to mitigate any impacts of both the development and the use, which remain in effect to this day. One of the most physical manifestations of this is the very tall 8-foot-high perimeter wall that basically separates the target property from these single-family homes. There were also additional measures. The city prepared a mitigated negative declaration for the project, which addressed issues such as noise, location of employee parking, and also the positioning of the parking lot lights, which are basically freestanding light poles that separate, that illuminate the target parking lot, but were installed with shields so that they do not illuminate any of the residential homes or their backyards. The project site is Zone C1, which is local business district. As I indicated, this particular slide is highlighting the target site, a target portion of the site, and the parking area. So this photograph shows the existing conditions of the old garden center area. So these photographs are showing the northernmost portion of the building. The photograph in the lower right-hand corner is taken from the parking area, looking back towards the what would be the rear of the target property. On the left-hand side of that picture, you will see the perimeter wall and the landscape buffer that basically separates the target site from the abutting residential properties. So the proposal that is before the Planning Commission this evening is to fully enclose that former garden center space. It would, as I indicated, it would be used for storage and warehousing purposes. And it would only be accessible to Target employees. In other words, no shoppers or members of the public would have access to any of the items that is stored in this portion of the proposed building. And there are no proposed changes in store hours of operation. So this slide shows the proposed storage addition, which is highlighted with the slashed area here. And what this slide is also indicating is the addition of 7 new parking stalls. And this is basically parking that is required to accommodate the additional square footage of the proposed storage addition. It should be noted that with the addition of these new parking spaces, the site will continue to comply with the city's zoning code with regard to on-site parking requirements. This is the floor plan. So this is showing the layout of the proposed storage area. As you can see, the primary entries to this area are internal to the store. There will be a emergency exit facing out towards the front of the building, towards Harbor, and also an emergency only exit facing north towards the parking area and towards the residential homes. Once again, I should point out that this exit would be for emergency exit purposes only. So with regards to the exterior elevations, the new storage building will be painted and treated to match the color treatment and materials of the existing Target store. There will also be wall-mounted light fixtures that will be designed so as not to illuminate residential properties. It should be pointed out that the footprint of the storage building will be the exact same footprint as the former garden center, which maintains a 60-foot setback to the abutting residential properties. So basically, the new portion of the building will be entirely enclosed. There will be no loading bays, windows, or non-emergency exit doors. And the original conditions of approval, as well as mitigation measures that were put in place for the Target project, which when it was originally approved back in 1999, still remain applicable and in effect. So as I mentioned, with regard to parking, the site will meet parking requirements. And staff has also incorporated some new conditions of approval that addresses circulation, parking, and cart collection. So once again, the light fixtures, the new light fixtures that will be attached to the building will be designed so as to illuminate the parking area and not the adjacent residential properties. There is no additional signage other than emergency exit or signage that's required by building code that will be applied to this portion of the building. And they will be modifying some of the landscape planners with regards to where they will be installing the new parking spaces that you saw in the earlier slide. And so they will be preparing and submitting landscape plans for that regard. So as I mentioned earlier, the original conditions of approval for DR 9922 and its subsequent amendments, including the holiday hours that I mentioned earlier, will still remain applicable and in place, as well as the mitigation measures in the original mitigated negative declaration. One of those conditions of approval and mitigation measures specifically requires lighting to be directed and or shielded so as not to illuminate adjacent properties. This became an issue when Target refurbished their light fixtures, their freestanding light fixtures that are adjacent to the residential properties. They had obtained permits to basically replace the old style lighting with modern LED lighting. That lighting was installed and the applicant did submit to staff the necessary photometric plans as well as a lighting study to indicate that these fixtures with the new illuminated LED lighting heads would still continue to not illuminate adjacent residential properties. As far as the California Environmental Quality Act, because this particular construction will be less than 10,000 square feet, it would be exempt under the CEQA provisions per section 15301. And also with the recommended conditions of approval and mitigation measures remaining in place, as mentioned earlier, staff is recommending approval of this development review, a revision subject to these conditions of approval and applicable mitigation measures. In response to our public notices, we did receive 3 public comments via email expressing concerns with the proposed addition, as well as citing the aforementioned issue with the light fixtures that Target had went ahead and had replaced. Once again, I should point out that this is completely separate from the project that's before you this evening, but I did want to mention that in response to questions and complaints regarding the light fixtures, the applicant did provide a light study with a photometric, and on several occasions, staff has gone out to verify that the shielding that was put in place for those light fixtures are operational and functioning. Also with me this evening is our planning consultant, Michelle Halligan. She was the one who prepared the analysis in the staff report and will be able to respond to any questions. And by way of history, I was in fact the original project planner for this project back in 1999, so 20-year milestone. And also representatives of Target Store are available to answer any questions any of the commissioners may have. And this will conclude my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Lee, very much for a good report. I have Commissioner Russell had her hand up first for questions, and then Commissioner Colbert, and then Commissioner Zick.
Yeah, this is, my understanding is that this is specifically designed for people to implement customer picking up special order items, things that they've picked up, that they've ordered through the internet. What's the pedestrian traffic pattern? Are they going to go into the store to get the items? Are they going to call ahead and have the items brought out to their cars? Is that a question staff can answer? Is that something I should hold for Target?
Hello, this is Michelle Halligan. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, great. I had some issues with my audio earlier. So the storage area can be used for a variety of things. One of Target's ideas was for order pickup, but really it's general storage, it's warehousing for the entire store. So the existing circulation pattern would continue. They are not proposing any new customer service areas, so it would not be bringing more pedestrian traffic to that side, that northern side of the property at all.
Okay, yeah, I was just a little unclear on that. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Colbert, and then Commissioner Zick, and then Commissioner Torje and Commissioner Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lee and Ms. Halligan, thank you for the staff report. I have a couple of questions for staff and then some obviously remaining questions for the applicant. And I'll just take it starting at the top. I have a question, Mr. Lee or Ms. Halligan, could you provide me with a bit of history, given that I know the reports weren't available online for us to review and were available upon request. Just a quick history, quick as possible, I guess, of why this became an MCUP and was separated specifically for the garden center. I think that would be helpful.
Yes, I can respond to that. Basically, because the garden center was open to the air, it required a minor conditional use permit because it was an outdoor activity.
Mhm.
So that's why there are actually two applications for this: the development review for the Target store, and then a separate minor CUP for the garden center.
Okay, thank you. And with the garden center no longer being in that area, is there a proposed relocation of the garden center in the future, or I'm asking for a couple of reasons?
I believe that Target had discontinued the use of their garden center several years ago. I am not aware of any plans for them to reintegrate it back into this particular Target store, but I would have to defer to their representatives to answer the specifics on that.
Okay. And my next question is regarding, I guess, the approach to this application. Why, I know we've done a number of parking deviations, and my question relating to based off your presentation, this is just gonna be for interior storage use, and there will be no retail. I think in response to your question to Commissioner Russell, there will be no retail use, and it only just for additional storage. And I think Ms. Halligan made some statements regarding that as well. If this is only for interior storage and it's not going to be an increase to the retail area, why are we proposing additional parking changes as opposed to doing a parking deviation? I understand that it's an addition of square footage, but the use of the square footage seems to be particularly non-impactful to the overall operations of the building. So
I can start with,
we do it? Yeah, go ahead.
Or I can start with a response, Commissioner. Essentially, the zoning code allows for shopping centers for the use of a shared parking analysis that was previously approved and incorporated into the zoning code. That analysis is based on gross floor area, and as a result, because this was an increase in square footage, staff input the square footage and it resulted in a required parking ratio, and our evaluation of the site plan was to ensure that adequate parking was provided to meet that code required number of parking spaces. So that was the basis for our analysis. From a practical perspective, we agree that an outdoor garden center that's used for retail versus an enclosed square footage area that's used for storage, from a demand perspective, there's really no change from a practical perspective, but the way that our code is built and our parking requirements are built, it is based on gross floor area. So that's the reason for our approach.
And you get to the crux of my issue, that our parking requirements seem to be not flexible in that way, which to me would negate or push more reason for a good reason, in fact, for parking deviation because of the operational changes and use. But that's just my perspective on that. But that's not what's before us. So I just wanted to get there. So in terms of maybe the operational piece of this room could be for online pickups or storage. I know that is kind of maybe a question for the applicant, but did the applicant indicate that this would be just for online pickup increases or anything? And I ask that because if so, are the parking spaces for online pickup for that area, are they going to be dedicated there? I've seen that at other Target locations.
Online order pickup is already a service provided at this location,
Mhm.
but the area that they're adding is general storage for access by employees only. So what Target chooses to store there could be online orders. It could be just general stock as well. But I will see if perhaps Justin or Tim, who are our applicants on the line, if they want to speak to the future use.
Okay. And so, and I guess we'll get to that and during, I don't want to skip ahead. But in terms of the parking calculation, and this, I guess you may have answered this a bit short while ago, just to make sure, that parking calculation for the 9,089 square feet and then the 708. So the storage area was included in the calculation for the parking requirement as well?
Right. We added the square footage to the shared parking agreement, and that resulted in the need to identify 14 new spaces.
Even if we understood that those spaces were just going to be for storage use.
Yes, I understand that that's just how the code is written, and I think staff is in agreement that it is more parking than needed for this warehousing use, but that's the shared parking agreement that's in place.
Okay. And for the condition of approval number 17, I just wanted to understand in terms of what it looks like, the floor plan that was shown before us. It looks like there's going to be like high shelves that may require the use of a forklift. And this may be for the applicant, but maybe you can provide an answer. Will there be a forklift operated in there? And I'm asking for a reason of noise.
That question would have to be answered by the applicant. That condition of approval is a standard one provided by fire anytime that there's warehousing.
Okay, so it's more of a fire-related issue. Okay, I wanted to understand just general noises and if there would be overnight working in this storage area, how that could potentially impact the neighbors, given that we don't have a SQL analysis associated with this. And my last question is related to the conditions of approval. We received or read a number of public comments about the conditions of approval and how they are currently may or may not be in violation. How are we auditing those or managing the conditions of approval for this site? Does it just come up whenever there is an issue presented by neighbors, or how do we ensure that there's an annual audit or the maintaining of they're in compliance, basically?
So Commissioner, I can respond to that. And this goes for any entitlement where conditions are applied. Staff works with the applicant throughout the design and plan approval process, as well as during construction. At the end of that construction project, staff does a site visit, including all of our multiple departments, to ensure that the project was implemented in the way that staff understood it to be planned. Following that, in terms of just during normal operations of any business, our code enforcement operation is primarily a complaint-based system. If we become aware of an issue, we will investigate it, and our code enforcement officers will open a case. They will determine if there is a violation of code and follow up with the property owner as well as the tenant to resolve that issue. We primarily do that on a complaint-based system. There are times where staff will make an observation because we're working on the site, for example, and we'll follow up in that way, but it is primarily a complaint-based system.
Okay. There were a couple of noise complaints that brought that to my attention. And I think Mr. Lee in his report made mention of a negative declaration being provided for this site. And I just wanted to understand why we took that approach, given that, and this is an important piece because I didn't understand, I didn't see the previous case because it wasn't available online, but I wanted to understand like this is a pretty large site, you know, and why wasn't there a sequel done initially? And from my understanding, it seems like it was kind of parceled out. That might have prevented that. But I want to understand now, given that this is 20 years later, and this is a new site, and also if this particular use, if Target doesn't exist in the next 5 years or so, and let's say this building is there, will the entitlements run with the land, or just are they specific to the applicant in this case? So I guess it's a two-part question.
So yes, so 20 years ago, once again, I can't believe it's been 20 years, but yes, the actually the CEQA mitigating negative declaration was for the entire development, the Costa Mesa Square, so it included Target, and it had, of course, mitigation measures specific to Target's operation, but the environmental document was for the entire project site, the whole 20 acres. And I forgot what the second or the first part of your question was.
Oh, Mel, I would just like to add that the mitigated negative declaration was the appropriate CEQA document at that time. And so CEQA was followed at that time. It's not an EIR, but a mitigated negative declaration was the appropriate CEQA document.
Okay. My next question was related to the entitlements, if they ran with the property or the applicant.
They run with the land.
The land, okay. All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Commissioner Zick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mel, it seems like there ought to be, Mr. Lee, excuse me, it seems like there ought to be some kind of a celebration for you revisiting this project, a kind of a trip down memory lane, hopefully mostly good memories of your earlier work on this project. So I appreciate the staff report. First of all, I do have a couple of questions. And my first question, the perspective I have for the first question is from the standpoint of the adjacent homeowners. I met with a homeowner that had some history with this project and some concerns. So my first question is from that perspective. The change that is being proposed here by Target, in my way of thinking, and help correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't seem like there would be any negative impact to the neighbors in terms of this change of use. The idea of enclosing the open air garden center, and well, first of all, the visual of that northern exposure seems to me that it would be improving. Some people might not object to a chain link fence, but I think in general, a block wall would be considered an improvement. In terms of noise from an open air garden center compared with what will be a fully enclosed storage area accessed only from the interior of the store, to me, that seems like there would be not only no impact, but maybe less impact. So I'm trying to envision in this change of use, whether there is anything that would create an additional impact on the neighbors above what they currently experience. And I don't see any. So do you think, am I missing anything, or do you generally agree with that observation?
Yes, and specifically with the way that this has been designed. So it's been designed that, unlike the garden center, which obviously was available to customers to use, this portion of the building will no longer be available to customers, just Target employees. And like I said, the only there are no windows, and the only exits that face out into this area are for emergency exit only. So in that regard, it would actually be an improvement over the prior garden center use.
Okay, and so let me kind of think through the use of this area north of the building in kind of this new operating model. The first thing I would point out is an appreciation for a condition of approval number 1 on handwritten page 6, which basically says all of the previous conditions associated with this project remain in full force. So this project and the new conditions of approval, so to the extent that residents had concerns previously, those concerns were, to the extent they were addressed by conditions of approval of previously approved projects, all those same protections are in full force. So it's not so much a question, but a kind of a foundational comment. One of the things that I was aware of that was a condition was that the parking along that north side is exclusively for customers, and use by employees is prohibited. There's even a signage to that extent. I'm assuming, and you can help me with this, you moved in the grid. I'm assuming that the rationale for that was because if it was used as employee parking, vehicles would be coming up against the wall separating the residential property, and on a continual basis, there would be doors opening and closing throughout the day as employees came and left for work. And with this only being customer parking, and because of its location, probably the least desirable customer parking, it would be the least impactful to residents with that restriction. Am I correct with that assumption?
That is very correct. That question brought back a lot of memories. Yes.
Sorry I hope I wasn't picking on any scabs. The reason I asked that is kind of twofold. One is when I visited the site today, I'd never been to the back corner of the property where the, I guess the emergency access gate is that it isn't used. And I was not aware that there was actually a building, occupiable building space back there. But there is some office space there. And there were also 2 vehicles parked in close proximity there, which could conceivably have been customers. I really wouldn't know. But the coincidence that I saw people in the office area and 2 vehicles parked in kind of a convenient location there led me to think they're employees. So let me ask you this question. Is access to that employee or to that work area, I'm assuming they're employees, is access to that employee area from the exterior, from the north side of that building? There was a door there, and I assume the answer to that is yes.
Yes, that is correct.
So the expectation is that the employees that work tucked way back in that northeast corner, the expectation would be that they park out in front of the store and walk back there. That'd be the expectation, correct?
That's the expectation, although I think that the staffing of that office building may be limited to just a handful of employees. In other words, the general employees that are working the floor in the Target store don't have access to that office. The office is restricted to like administrative personnel only, which is why there's probably on any occasion there may be 1 or 2 cars parked back there. So that would be those cars would be specific for the employees that are using that part of the office building.
Okay, so I'm not so much trying to split hairs, but the question by its nature does split hairs. And that is relative to the condition of approval that limits the area to customer parking only. Do we make an exception relative to the condition of approval, not from a practical or consideration standpoint? Do we make an exception that allows employees of that office space area to park back there?
The specific condition of approval does not go to that into that level of detail.
but it is sufficiently clear that this area of parking is for customers only, not for employees.
That would be correct, yes.
And the new 7 parking spaces that are proposed as part of this project would also be for customers only, not for employees.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And the applicant can also probably address how that office portion is used as well.
Okay. So the subject of lighting, so I'm understanding clearly that the lighting is not part of this project. The reason why it's a topic is because there are some resident concerns, and if they feel that they have concerns with the existing management and operation of this site, then they're going to be understandably concerned about any future projects that could either add additional concerns. In other words, take care of the old problem before you start doing something new. It would be maybe a general sense that they have. So let me ask about the lighting quickly. So I understood from you that what they've done is they've replaced old technology lighting with new LED lighting, which clearly would be probably more energy efficient. That's largely why I see LED lighting being done. There is a concern about the spillover into the neighborhood. And so my question is, to what extent have we, or will we be able to assess the lighting installation once it's complete and ensure that it satisfactorily does not spill over into the adjacent residential property?
Commissioner Zick, staff has been out to the site. We've had planning staff, code enforcement staff, building staff out to the site to inspect it after the most recent fixtures were placed, and I can't think of the word for the shields, and the shields were placed. Staff has found that, and we have some pictures that can show this, staff has found that there is limited to no spillover from the lights at this point in time. It's almost a direct cut down the property line where the lighting is and where it stops. Once it's finally complete, staff will do a final inspection of it and verify that again. We've looked at it from within the neighborhood, from within the target property. We've looked down the property lines, and it appears to be working effectively and not creating unreasonable light spillover.
Okay, thank you very much for that answer. I've got a question about landscaping, and that's because it wasn't exactly clear to me the alignment of the new block wall at the garden center. So not the landscaping along the property line, but the landscaping that is immediately abutting the northern edge of the building. There's already landscaping there in front of the garden center, a little strip of ground landscaping. My question is relative to the alignment of the new block wall that will go up where the garden center exists. Is that alignment of the new wall going to be recessed to where it is in where the chain link fence currently is, and the existing landscaping would remain? Or will all of that be moved out a couple of feet to where the alignment of the wall would be completely in line from east to west? I looked at the plans and I wasn't able to discern that from the level of detail of the drawing.
I believe that that is another question that we can discuss with the engineer for the project who's available. But they will be creating the construction documents once or if this project is approved. And at that point, they will be submitting a detailed landscape plan.
So, okay, thank you for that, Michelle. So in the detailed landscaping plan, clearly that's where we would see details. What my question then might go to is the idea of, if we don't require certain landscaping, then it wouldn't be you know, a surprise or expectation that they would not be providing landscaping in a certain area. So could you direct me to where it would be in our, maybe a condition of approval that indicates that there needs to be landscaping retained on the north edge of the building? And that way we would be expecting to see whether it's in the exact same place or move 2 feet if the wall alignment changes. We'd at least know there is going to be landscaping there. That's kind of a question.
So we're going to flip through the conditions of approval here as well as the details of the plan set that was submitted and come back to the commission.
I appreciate that. Okay, so I've got just a couple more questions. And looking at page 6, the conditions of approval. And condition 1B, B as in Baker, seemed a little confusing to me. Not the first part. The first part says loudspeakers, PA, paging systems, two-way radios shall be prohibited outside the building. I get that. I don't get the exception, except for drive-through fast food restaurants. I don't understand why that exception is in this condition of approval.
Commissioner, that is a holdover from the original development review. And we were repeating those conditions because they were mitigation measures as part of that development review.
And also, I would add that once again, this was for the entire Costa Mesa Square, which I believe does have at least one or maybe one drive-through. I'm not exactly certain.
So I was suspecting that was the reason, but then I wondered to myself, if that was the reason, are there other aspects of the larger square project that we should be looking at and seeing here to ensure I guess, okay, I'm just thinking out loud. Just like we're not talking about the lighting here as part of this project, I don't know why we're talking about fast food restaurants here as part of this project. That's what I'm wondering about. If we already have a condition of approval that talks about no loudspeaker, PA system, paging system, except for drive-through restaurants, it would seem to me that condition would already exist in one of the earlier amendments, and therefore would, by that reference, remain in full force. And then relative to this specific project, that wouldn't need to be repeated. So I won't belabor that point. You've helped me understand why it's there at least. Next is condition of approval number 8. So this one says, loading and unloading of deliveries on the north side of the property shall not occur before 8 a.m. or after 3 p.m. First thing is I don't see it say Monday through Friday, but that isn't really my question. My question is that I'm surprised there would be any loading or unloading of deliveries on the north side of the property, given that the only doors that are there are going to be emergency exit doors, and that the real deliveries and the truck dock is on the opposite side of the building. So I'm concerned that we would even have a condition of approval here that would allow for loading and unloading of deliveries. And so it would be my desire, if and when we get to that point, of eliminating this as a condition of approval altogether, unless you can tell me why this ought to be here.
Commissioner, this was a previous condition of approval, and we wanted to, again, repeat it because we felt that it was important for the residents on the north side. I think that there are different types of deliveries. The garden center did have some minor deliveries, but they weren't the large, refrigerated trucks, for example. So I believe, and Mel may be able to help me because he knows more of the history, but this is a holdover from those garden deliveries that were of a lower scale, but still the residents wanted them limited due to potential noise impacts.
I totally understand the residents' concern, and I guess it's because of that that I'm trying to take a larger step here and preclude any loading or unloading in that location. So unless you can give me a reason why, and maybe this will be a question for the applicant, a reason why it's necessary for their operation to have loading or unloading, I don't think this is one of those that ought to be repeated. So maybe that's just an opinion, and I'll run that past the applicant.
Just to clarify, that as Michelle said, that condition of approval was a carryover. It was actually a carryover condition of approval from the minor conditional use permit that we processed for the garden center. And like she said, they had like loading, and not like the main loading dock that Target has, but it did allow for some loading and unloading in that general area.
To support the garden center, most likely.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you very much. Those are my questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Lee and Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Tourget?
Yeah, surprisingly, a lot of my questions were answered. I just wanted to ask a confirmation of the last question in terms of delivery. The condition of approval that says that's the holdover from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Can we confirm that the only entrances to this new structure would be emergency exits?
Yes, the new structure would have an emergency exit that faces harbor and one emergency exit that faces the north side of the property. I'll have to check the floor plan, or we can check in with the applicant to see what the existing offices have, because there might be an existing double door back at the offices. So I'll add that to the list of things for the applicant to respond to.
Great, and maybe this is another question for the applicant. If there's any change to the delivery circulation, I think this was asked before, but I just want to confirm.
Commissioner, as far as Mel and I have been informed, we don't see any need for a change in circulation. The applicant has proposed to maintain the existing loading bays as they are, and that they would not be bringing new truck traffic around to that northern side. The northern entrance from College Avenue is actually an emergency access route only.
Great. And then one last question, condition of approval 11 about exterior lighting. Do we have we included requirements in other similar conditions of approval, a measurement by which exterior lighting would not, where we could measure whether or not there's an impact by exterior lighting?
So in general, Commissioner, the city does not have a quantitative standard for lighting, for example, measured at the property line or at an adjacent property line is typical in various cities. This city does not have a requirement. We can impose a specific quantitative requirement on a case-by-case basis, but our conditions of approval are usually performance-based. So you'll see this type of wording that really responds to light glare and light spillover onto adjacent properties.
Okay. So if there were concerns about light spillover, light glare on adjacent properties, we wouldn't have a measurement by which to quantify whether that was happening.
We do not have a city adopted standard, no.
Thank you, that's all my questions.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Perkins.
Great. Thank you very much. Excellent questions. I've got two questions, one of which is relevant to the emergency exits again, but on a different angle of looking at them. On page 30, handwritten page 33, we see the layout of the emergency exits. And it actually struck me during Mel, your presentation, Mr. Lee. I guess I just wondered, are the emergency exits that they're proposing sufficient for a 10,000 square foot warehouse? It just feels like if this is high storage, especially the exit that's on the northern wall, seems like it's almost sort of buried within racks of shelving. And I could imagine in the event of, hopefully it never happens, but a fire or other disaster, it not being entirely clear how to get out of that structure. So I just wanted to check and make sure, are the number and location of those emergency exits sufficient?
I would like to postpone that question for the applicant, but I will note that building did review the site plan and the floor plan, and that is not something they took issue with at this time. But of course, when construction documents are submitted, perhaps that would be maybe a minor modification they would have, but it didn't come up during our design review, and fire reviewed it as well.
Great. I had to think that people were looking at it, and again, I'm just a layman looking at this, so I would trust their opinions. Second topic I want to talk about was parking, which I know is not directly related to this, since they are accommodating the new parking need. Thank you, Commissioner Colbert, for your excellent questions, clarifying so much of that. One question I had is, I know that they have like about a 1,025 or so parking space requirement. And I was wondering, I know there's a provision in the code that allows them to get a potential 1 parking space credit for that. Is that provision applicable to this site? And are they taking advantage of that? Because I know there are multiple bike racks on site.
I can address that. Back when this project was being processed in 1999, at that time, our code did not have the provision that it currently has for the parking credit for bike racks. Okay. I think Target just realized that a lot of their employees come there by bicycle, and some of their customers, so they just have lots of bike racks.
Yeah, I mean, I think this could be an interesting opportunity, again, to sort of mention the potential benefits of bike parking. I mean, when I say they have multiple bike racks, at least in front of the store, I think they have 2. And so it strikes me, in the shopping center, there are not a ton. So it struck me as a way potentially to help encourage more bike racks, or at least say, hey, you could not remove one of those cart corrals. I agree with Commissioner Colbert that I see personally no reason to require them to add another 14 parking spaces. For instance, on Black Friday, I think I mentioned this, the commission, I went around to some of our local shopping centers to explore parking lots and have photographs of this square's parking lot with multiple spaces still open, even on Black Friday, the busiest shopping day of the year. So they obviously have met our city requirements, and our city requirements are what they are, but I also would say I see no reason to be requiring them to do these modifications. So those are my questions. Thank you so much.
Okay, terrific. I have some questions, but I'll defer until after the applicant presentation and the public hearing. So I'll open the public hearing, and are applicants with us? And could you please state your names?
Yes, Chairman, Commissioners, thank you. This is Justin Becker. Can you hear me?
I can.
All right, thank you so much.
Mr. Becker, I need to ask you if you've read the staff report and the conditions of approval, and if you agree with the conditions.
I have read the staff report and conditions of approval and agree with the conditions, yes.
All right, if you have a presentation, you may proceed.
I don't have a specific presentation, ready and willing to answer all the questions noted. First, just wanted to thank all the planning staff, yourselves included, for your hard work during this project over the past months, especially during challenging time, as everybody's noted. Everybody's stepping up, and it's really great to see. I work on a lot of these around the nation, and it's really cool to see the public jump in how they have, and doing whatever they have to do with online meetings and things to make sure that commerce and everything doesn't come to a screeching halt. So very much appreciated.
Okay, so if I can, Mr. Becker, I have a couple of questions I'll ask you, and then
sure.
Commissioners, you can punch your raise hand button and jump in if you want to. Couple of things I want to kind of make sure of and kind of cross the T's, dot the I's is, this is not going to be a facility where on the north side, customers are going to pick up merchandise they either ordered online, or it's a large item and it's being delivered to their car on the north side.
Correct. This is an enclosed storage space only for internal employee access.
Okay. All deliveries into the store of merchandise will continue to occur at the southern loading dock, and there will be no delivery of inventory on the side of the building, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. The emergency exit doors, and I'm looking at handwritten page 33 of the report. And by the way, to Commissioner Tourget, to answer your question there, or maybe it was another commissioner, looks like there's 3 doors leading to the outside on the office building in the northeast corner. Those emergency doors, are they, from an interior standpoint, are they marked emergency exit only? Are they wired to trip an alarm? And do they have any kind of mechanism attached to the outside of the door that allows entry by pulling on a handle or what have you?
They are only exit only from interior. They are marked as emergency exit only. I would have to defer to, it's above my architectural know-how, but I believe they are wired so that when you open it, it's a kind of an emergency goes off. Tim, who is the store ops manager, is also on the call for Target, so he could potentially answer that question.
Okay, is that Mr. Kindig?
Yes, hello.
Yeah, could you answer that question?
Yeah, there will be similar to all the other emergency exits that we have in all the other doors in the store. There's an alarm that goes to alarm panel that we react to.
Okay, so if somebody walked out that door, lights would go off and noises would be made.
No, not to the neighborhood. It'd go to a panel inside our store.
I was being kind of facetious and I shouldn't have been. Yeah, so your security panel will light up somewhere. Okay. All right.
And to your last question, I think about handles. No, they do not have exterior handles for the exact
Okay, so
reason
nobody
that you're
can
thinking.
enter from the outside.
Correct.
I think that's all the questions I have. Commissioner Tourget, then Commissioner Colbert, then Commissioner Zick. You may ask questions. Jenna, go ahead.
Lower my hand.
Oh, so you're done?
Yes, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, Kadarius, Commissioner Colbert, you're next. You're good? You're on mute.
I was gonna say, I was doing flip the order. Can I come after Commissioner Zick?
You bet. Commissioner Zick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's see, before my questions, just let me do some bookkeeping here. So Justin, you are with Kimley Horn, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and Tim, you are the Target store manager, is that correct?
That is correct.
Got it. Okay, Tim, my first question to you. So if a resident had a topic of concern that they wanted to talk to somebody about, would you be the person that they would talk with, or do you have somebody else at the store that they would contact? What kind of communication channel exists, or how do you prefer that it exists?
Yeah, they can talk to me or one of my executives, either or. If I'm not there, and I don't want to waste their time, they can talk to one of the executives and they'll get to me, and then I can get back to the neighbor.
Okay. All right. So my first question has to do with this condition of approval number 8, which limits the time frame for loading and unloading on the north side of the property. and you probably heard me express an interest in eliminating that. And if I was successful in having that condition eliminated, which would preclude any deliveries or unloading on the north side of the building, does that present any hardship to you?
And this question's to me?
I can answer.
Tim and Justin.
I can answer that. That would be a no. We're fine with eliminating that
Okay.
loading. It was from a previous for the garden center, which no longer exists or won't
Excellent.
exist.
Thank you for that. And Tim, I'm assuming you're okay with that as well, right?
Yeah, that was just garden center in the past.
Okay, thank you. And then my next question, and I hate to go back and talk about lighting, but let me sort of ask the question in kind of a hypothetical way. So I understand the design of the lights and the current performance of the lights as it's been observed is as designed and satisfactory to at least to the view of the city officials who've looked at it and presumably to you as well. But if for some reason, don't know what the reason would be, but if for some reason there was a particular light standard or a particular issue relative to some of the lighting that a homeowner said, gee, can you do something about that light standard or these two light standards and put up some additional shielding to make sure that doesn't spill into my yard? And if they somehow were able to demonstrate that actually did spill into their yard, is that something you're amenable to doing? And I'm not talking about changing the conditions of approval. I'm just trying to understand the level of your kind of frame of mind in terms of trying to deal with the resident concerns about those lights.
I can take this one. This is Justin. Yeah, I think that what is out there is definitely adequate and provides a zero foot candles at the property line. However, if there was, for any reason, some visual obscurity that a neighbor noticed, I think there's additional panel shielding that could potentially be put up if absolutely necessary. I don't think you could do anything in terms of raising or lowering that might go against even city code standards for site lighting on site, but definitely a shielding mechanism if absolutely necessary.
Okay, and I appreciate that answer because, from what I've gleaned, there are concerns, and I just kind of want people to know that your view of things isn't take it or leave it. Your view of things is we think we've done it right, and if there's an issue, we're more than happy to look at it again in more detail.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Commissioner Colbert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of questions for the applicant related to my question in regards to the floor plan, the interior floor plan. I wanted to understand, and I believe the previous condition of approval may have addressed this, but I didn't see it. So Melanie, let me know if is a forklift going to be operated within the interior storage space that's been proposed?
Tim, I might have to put this one to you in terms of typical operations back there.
Question. We've never had a forklift at the store. The only time if there's been a forklift was for maybe a construction project, but according to the original conditions of improvement, we've never had a forklift. What would be used in there are ladders, or what we call electronic crown. It's quiet. It's just electronic.
Okay. All right. And in terms of there were a number of code violations in the past in relation to noise and other impacts. How have you all mitigated those? And I think Commissioner Zick kind of alluded to this question, but what typically is your protocol for working with the community, given the history of this project and kind of the litany of violations that have been reported here?
Yeah, I can take that. This is Tim. Yeah, everything's very serious. We take any noise on that property very, very serious. We want to be a good community. So as soon as we hear a complaint, we go with whoever has had the complaint. For example, we used to have sweepers that would go and sweep the parking lot. They're motorized. And we just do hand pickups now, just to minimize noise. And we want to make sure that we're not making any noise before 8 o'clock. So we took those conditions very seriously, and we go after the person that's doing it.
Okay. Okay. And in the past, whenever there has been a violation and there has been a fee associated with those violations, your department has made payment to the city for those without any outstanding issues.
Yes.
Okay. And one more question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll come back to this. Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other commissioners, so I'll open this for public comment. Julie or Brenda, do we have any written comments we have to read in the record?
First, Mr. Chair, if we could take public comments.
Sure.
And then if people are speaking, then we will not read their public comments into the record.
Okay, very good. So I see the first in the queue is Mr. Morelli. So if Brenda, if you could open up the mic for him.
Thank you. Mr. Morelli, you may speak.
Mr. Morelli, are you there?
Mr. Morelli, if you could please unmute yourself. Let me see if I can unmute you.
So Mr. Morelli, if we're going to hear you, we need to have you unmute the microphone, which is on your screen lower left.
There he goes.
Okay, are you there? Let me see. Pull up the volume. This is Sarah Morelli.
Oh, okay.
Okay, do we have communication?
We do. I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Boy, I have to first say, I think we've already gone an hour and 45 minutes on this, and I only get 3 minutes. So good evening, and how can I go ahead and make sure I can get what I want to say, without rushing through. So I'm the property owner of 1421 and 1425 Shamrock Lane, which is close to 1/3 of the total property line, but 100% affected by what goes on at the garden center and then the activity that is requested on this DR 2002. And I'm also talking about during the construction time, the noise, and then also once it is completed. And I understand this project is to convert the center into storage only. And this is, a true storage center, no service. The activity is going from the inside the storage room, inside the store versus coming from the outside. And that's what I'm looking at your package. And so if you look on your package on page 7, I think it is, or 6 and 7. So we're talking about exhibit, wait, no. I'm not talking about that. Your regular page 7, not the handwritten 7, but regular page 7. And on that page, I like what Mel Lee has written. All product stored in the area will be brought into the store via the existing loading dock on the south side of the building. There will be no transfer of products from the parking lot on the north or west sides of the new building. But it's not in the exhibit B, and that's what you're voting on tonight. So I would like that added to section 1, and that would go ahead and make sure that it is understood that we're not going to have any activity that way. So looking at your exhibit B, page 6, I'd like to address then section A, if I may, and then remove 1A and revise it to all doors shall be closed at all times except in the event of emergency, no loading and or unloading permitted. Definitely, we're looking at removing item or section 8. Take that out. No, we don't need that there. It was only for the garden center, but it was abused, and I did visually see dairy being delivered at that section, so we would like that removed. Section E, no loading dock. The building will be used specifically for storage and access for storage area, and will be limited. Excuse me, I apologize. Take it to the other room. So I apologize. I'm sorry. It's. Let me go back to that section E. External doors facing north and northwest for emergency only, and must stay closed at all time. No deliveries allowed in this area. Use of the south side of Baker Street entrance. No outdoor storage shall be permitted. No forklifts are allowed in the parking lot area.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, the 3 minutes are up.
Oh, okay. So see, that's, to me, I have a whole other section there, but I'm looking also at the time of, during construction and noise. I plan in the future to live in that house when it's single story, and I need it to leave my 2-story home. Thank you for your time. And any questions you have, you may.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments, ma'am. Brenda,
Yeah.
next.
I do know, I don't, it is, my husband would like his to be read by you. Is that correct, honey?
That's correct.
So there is the 2 of us, but his what is submitted, he'd like you guys to read.
Yes, we will read his letter into the
Good.
record.
It's so difficult to understand the clarity and moving forward.
You did terrific. Thank you for your call. Next speaker. Brenda.
Yes, the next speaker, the phone number begins in 714 and ends in 577.
Oh, that is me. Oops, let me. Yeah, because we didn't know how to get in.
Well, it's the same speaker, Brenda. It's the same speaker.
Oh, okay.
Mrs. Morelli.
Thank you.
Okay. So I don't see any other public comment from participants. So why don't we go to the written comments?
Okay, the first one is from Al Morelli. This weekend, I received the agenda posting of the proposed DR 20-02, for which here I do ask to reschedule the commission special meeting to a later date. Request rescheduling for a new date is to allow public visitation to City Hall building and to have access to public records. Note, I did ask for public records from City Clerk, and to date I have not received. In case if the Planning Commission proceed with the hearing of DR 99-22 conditions of approval, please note from the property owner and party of interest are additional input which needs to be included as part of the staff report. Facts: for the last 20 years, we have been encountering constant and ongoing issues with Target store for lack of compliance and enforcement as mandated with the original condition per DR 99-22. The garden center was permitted under specific minor condition use permit and thus no longer in use. Then such given permit should be dissolved. The proposed new warehouse storage building is not a replacement building, for it must be subject to current city building laws with no exemptions or waivers. Comparing the new desired development should be made with reference to the original Fedco site while protecting the pre-existing home property rights for the residents. Forward statement by Target store representatives are not statements of actual facts and should be treated as cautionary promises. Refer to the meeting minutes dated year 2000, hours of store operations. For now, as these promises are broken and changed. Building foot need to be reduced in relation to parking requirements, and thus the removal of 7 cart stalls and adding 7 parking via North Fire Lane turnaround is a significant manipulating unethical game. Here noted that Measure Y approval might be applicable for this new site development as traffic circulation impact will be increased by result of future higher and additional car arrivals. The DR 99-22 document and all its conditions shall be available online for easy access by city police officers as reporting violation needs to be witnessed and documented. Handling of active code enforcement violations for corrections should mandate specific time given for immediate correction. Recordation of conditions of approval. The city should order the recordation changes, modifications in the official records of the Orange County for the subject property. All notices need to restate and documenting the original conditions in conjunction with DR 99-22. Printing the original conditions of approval shall be reproduced on the index sheet of any constructional plan submitted for the site. The index sheet of plan shall reference to the conditional use authorization and any subsequent amendments or modifications. Revocations due to violations of conditions should implement. Okay, the timer has gone off, so the rest will be included in the record. The next comment is by Jeff Gibbs. Sorry. Hello, I'm grateful to the city team working to respond so quickly to my questions. I am still disappointed in the lack of information regarding this project provided in the notification to the city. Further, I am concerned with the rush to approve this project. Under normal circumstances, a project of this size would move so quickly. I know my 2 projects were less than 1% the size of this one, took the city over 6 months to approve. I am concerned and I am requesting an immediate delay to any decision regarding Target can be properly vetted. As stated in my original email, when Target was originally permitted to replace Fedco, several concessions were made to Target with the understanding the neighbors would have some protection as well. History shows us Target consistently comes back and asks for more with the disregard for residents which live nearby. As I reviewed the plans, I questioned why a rush. Target is using the excuse of increased mobile orders. As we know, orders increased due to COVID, and I cannot imagine Target wanting to maintain this level of mobile orders post-COVID. We all know consumers spend more when they are walking through stores, hence the reason we are blessed with South Coast Plaza. If Target's long-term plan is to increase foot traffic in their store, I have an immediate solution, and that is to use the grocery store space for additional storage, as the fresh produce will no longer be necessary. The other solution, which I mentioned in my previous email, was to use the space vacated by Float Easy. I have attached photos from my morning walk. These were taken on College Avenue. Why is this allowed? Target knows this garbage is out and exposed to the neighborhood. Why does code enforcement allow this? Target is that neighbor that you cringe when you ask to do anything more, and it is a total disregard for the rest of the neighborhood. As I gain additional information, I am opposed to this project. For starters, it is a short-term solution for a pandemic, which hopefully is handled differently in the months to come. There is not a long-term need for storage to provide to mobile orders. If they are looking to compete with Amazon, there are numerous vacant buildings in Costa Mesa they could use. There is no need to impact the residents with additional construction for the short term and additional parking long term, unless they have other plans. I ask you for a proper delay to fully vet this project until we are back to somewhat normal living and shopping. This delay would provide time for Target to become a better neighbor, clean up their property facing residents, and improve cleaning of its ground, especially behind the store. If the trash behind Target were in the parking lot, I am sure there would be a proper urgency to remove it by both the city and Target. Thank you for your time. Please delay the approval of this project. And
Okay,
then,
thanks. Any more?
no, that is all that I have to read into the record.
All right, and seeing no other participants on the lines raising their hands, I will close public comment. ask the applicant if they wish to make any comments relative to the public comments they heard.
I guess a couple minor, sure, a couple minor responses. Just, I think there was comments about conditions affecting the neighbors and concerns about those not carrying through, which I think have all been vetted, that all the original underlying conditions are going to apply here, plus the ones going forward for this project. So I hope that that mitigates any concern there. To, I believe it was the most recent applicant on the trash, I think Tim could comment that that was all cleaned up as soon as it was noted, and primarily due to, yes, again, high levels of cardboard due to COVID and things for deliveries and things, and understanding that it was not in a proper location, so that was handled immediately.
Okay, Mr. Kindig, anything else, or are we good? Looks like we're good. So I'm going to close the public hearing and ask the commissioners if they have a motion or additional questions and a motion. Oh wait, let me get back up. We got Commissioner Torje raised her hand. And then there's also Commissioner Zick and Commissioner Colbert. So let me go through real quick. Commissioner Colbert, are you wishing to make a motion, or do you have more questions?
I have more questions.
Okay, Commissioner Zick, how about you?
One question.
Okay, and Commissioner Torje?
To jump the gun, make a motion.
Okay, so Commissioner Colbert, you're up, and then Commissioner Zick.
Okay, I do want to understand this from the applicant, and then I have a subsequent question regarding, maybe this is kind of like a Robert's Rule of Order piece. I felt like what the public comment, I felt like what she was saying was very important. And I wanted to hear the remaining of her recommendations, as she has lived next to the applicant. And I didn't get to hear that. So I'm kind of upset that, with that, but I understand that her comments were cut short. I just wish I heard what she was recommending next. But my question is to the applicant. What is the motivation behind the additional storage space for the project? And how did you all determine this need at this time?
Sure. So in general, Target is looking at some of their underutilized space, and this store being a very successful store in the community, understood that this could be a great and easy and efficient way to kind of fit the bill for additional storage that's definitely needed, especially not just in current times as COVID, but in general, it's seen an uptick in online retail and things where they need more localized ways of getting products to guests when they need it.
Okay, and in your capacity projections, I guess, for future growth of this particular store, is there any indication that there will be additional square footage requested on site? Because I think you're kind of impacted at this time, and at this time, you've reached maximum growth. Are there any projections for future growth, given based off what you just said?
There is not, and I would agree with your statement that I believe this entire shopping center is very close to maximum FAR capacity. So I don't believe that there's an ounce of additional square footage, but it's not worth going after, really.
Okay, and my final question is regarding the need to manage this operation with the increase in operations. There's obviously going to be an increase in employees. So does your employee parking, is that satisfied through the current count, or is this that the new spaces that were identified to address that?
I don't believe there would be a need for increased employees. I don't know if Tim could speak to that as well, but I believe the storage is just that, and existing employee count would remain the same.
Okay. All right, Mr. Chairman, I have no additional questions. For the applicant, I have a couple of questions for staff. Is it possible to, given that this is, some of the conditions of approval were specific to the garden center, moving forward, given that this is a new structure, those conditions can be removed, given that is separate from the DR and it's kind of standing on its own? Is that true?
Mr. Lee?
Commissioner, I can take a shot at that. Yes, that's correct. We've structured the conditions of approval so that if you would like to make modifications to the conditions, you can do that through this amendment to the previous development review.
Okay, and in terms of the emergency exit lights that are being proposed over this exit, were those included in the lighting study or analysis for this, or is that completely separate from the parking LED piece?
Commissioner, it is completely separate from the parking light issue. So the lights that would go above the new emergency doors are located approximately 2 feet above those doors, and they were shown in the presentation with a shielded design.
Okay, and I understand that. So are those lights activated at a certain hour, and are they responsive to motion, or how does that work?
They are security lights that are affixed to the wall, you know, above the door, and they would stay on all night for security purposes.
Okay.
They are similar to those that exist on Target's property right now, but the applicant is proposing to use a more shielded design.
Okay, similar to the shielded design that is currently being questioned.
No, we can go back into the presentation and show an example. These are not parking lot lights. These are exit door lights. And so they are not.
I saw the three. I have questions about them since they are directly in the elevation of them in addition to the brightness potentially, and that they'll be illuminated all night. I just had a couple of questions about that since those neighbors are directly there.
Mel, if you're able to share your screen, we can go back to that slide. The applicant did send us examples of the lighting fixtures that would go above the emergency doors.
Okay. And while we're there, is there is there any way to see, like, I mean, I understand like the candlefoot piece, but that's kind of what I wanted to see because I didn't see that anywhere as to how those lights, just due to where they'll be located and their proximity to the neighbors' yards or backyards.
Am I allowed to comment here?
Please go ahead.
To clarify as well, I don't know the exact height of these, within the range of 8 to 9 feet just from a door height and being above, but being that the screen wall adjacent to the neighbors is 8 feet, the visibility line of sight to these will be nil. There's no way that a person could be able to see those.
Okay. All right, that satisfies my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Commissioner Zick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tim, a couple of questions for you. Do you work at this Target store location?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so here's what I'm trying to sort of understand a little bit. Let's see, I think it was the name of the individual, the public that we had read in, a Mr. Gibbs. I saw his letter and I saw the pictures that he attached, which showed the wrapped up cardboard and plastic materials immediately adjacent to your loading dock, but on the exterior, visible to, well, directly across the street from the home that's at the corner of Galway and College. And so here's what I'm trying to sort of understand. And this just could be the way people respond to issues. What I'm thinking is if Mr. Gibbs wanted to solve that problem and he saw it. And unfortunately, he's not on the line. I guess I couldn't ask him. But what I'm thinking is it would take less time to call you than it would to get out a camera and go take pictures of this stuff. And if this was the sort of thing that you responded to right away, it sure didn't look like it would take a person more than 30 minutes to move the materials out of the way. So do you have familiarity with this particular trash / recycling issue? And could you help me understand kind of your view of how that occurred and how it couldn't have just been like resolved? First of all, not done in the first place, but second of all, resolved in a quicker, more satisfying way to where, you know, a planning commission isn't getting a letter and pictures of this stuff?
Yeah, I totally agree. It was unacceptable, basically. Those bales should not have been there. The process is those bales go lower down in the dock and we recycle those. Every other day, we sweep those back to the DC. So my team prepped those there and they shouldn't have. I've corrected that with the leadership. You will not see that going forward.
Okay. Have you by any chance, and I'm not asking you to do this, I'm just asking if you've done this, have you reached out to Mr. Gibbs? Have you had any communication with him about this or any other concern that he's had?
No, I've never talked to Mr. Gibbs. I've talked to Al Morelli in the past, but this letter was the first one I've seen from Mr. Gibbs.
Okay. All right. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okie dokie. So Commissioner Torje, I believe you had a motion.
Yes, I do have a motion. I would like to motion, based on what we've heard this evening, to find that the project is categorically exempt from the provisions of CEQA per CEQA guidelines, and approve the development review subject to conditions of approval with 2 modifications. The first being the removal of 1B, which references the fast food, drive-through fast food restaurants, and a modification / removal to 8, and I'd ask for city staff advice on how to word it. But instead of saying loading and unloading of deliveries on the north side of the property shall not occur before 8 a.m. or after 3 p.m., removing it and replacing it with no deliveries on the north side of the property shall occur.
Okay, so is there a second?
I'll second for discussion.
Okay, so there's a motion on the floor by Commissioner Torje and seconded by Commissioner Zick. Commissioner Zick, you're on.
So I definitely like the treatment of the condition of approval 8 instead of eliminating it. You're clearer with the intent by leaving it in and specifically saying loading and unloading of deliveries on the north side of the property shall be prohibited, or language to that effect. So thank you for that. I like the way you did that. Kind of a question on 1B. Is it just the exception portion of 1B that you're talking about striking? Because I would think we still want to prohibit loudspeakers, PA, and paging and 2-way radios from outside the building, period.
Yes, just removing the exception for drive-through fast food restaurants.
Okay, that's what you meant. I'm just clarifying that. Okay, great. Thank you. I'm totally in support of your motion. And I have comments about that. Should I go ahead and do that now, Chair?
Oh, I will in a minute. I've got a quick follow-up question to that. So, Mel, there are no drive-throughs on the property now. Is that correct? I don't believe there are.
On the target property or
Just on the entire site.
yeah, I don't think that there are actually.
So if one came forward, it'd be subject to a conditional use permit, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so that condition could be added back in if that happened. The
Yes.
exception. Okay. Okay. Commissioner Zick.
Okay, so I indicated I'd support the motion. Couple of comments. The first thing I want to comment on is this idea of rushing the project through, I think is how it was characterized. And this has a familiar ring to me now because we've heard that same sentiment on several different items on our agenda over the last couple of meetings. And I don't agree that we're rushing things through. That's not my sense at all. And I definitely don't think there's any hidden agenda to put things on our calendar before a holiday or after a holiday or when people are on vacation or when people are busy with school. Or I don't believe there's any of that. Things show up on the calendar when staff is good and ready with their analysis and their hard work, and an applicant's ready, and that's when things get on our agenda. So I don't believe there's a rush. That being said, there is something going on that I do have a concern about, and I'll express it without really knowing what the solution is. And here's the concern. Here's a concern as it was expressed to me. A homeowner finds out about a project that is literally next door to them. They find out about this project several days before a decision-making body is going to say yay or nay. They find out about it on Friday. Just so happens that's when I found out about it too. I feel like I was able to have enough time to completely digest the staff report, visit the site, to the extent that there were people that were able to react as fast as me and reach out to me, I was able to communicate with them. But there isn't a whole lot of time that a homeowner has or a property owner has to react to a project of this size, a larger project, even a smaller project. And so here's what I'm wondering about. And let me first ask the question to staff. When a planning application is received by the city, is the fact that that exists, is that public information? Mr. Curtis or Ms. Lee?
Commissioner Zick, yes, once it's filed with the city, it is public information.
Okay, so here's kind of what I'm thinking about. And this is the sort of the ideal world, but I'm thinking out loud. If, I talked at the very beginning about public awareness, not public participation, but public awareness, just being aware. And if somebody had a way of being aware that a planning application had been received at a location that was near their home, whether it was within 500 feet or not, but it was within an area that they had an interest. They would have an opportunity, by knowing a planning application existed, they'd have an opportunity to make the call and find out some information. Maybe they wouldn't get a whole lot, but they'd at least know, hey, what is it that they're planning on doing? They could possibly get some information. And I would guess they could certainly get information well ahead of 4 days notice before a meeting. So when people say that this is being rushed through, I don't agree with that. When people say that they feel rushed, given the amount of time between when they find out about something and when they have to react, collect their thoughts, organize what it is that they want to say within 3 minutes, fashion the language that they'd like to see changed in, that's an awful lot to do for somebody. And I think that because we're all in the business of serving the public, we should try to find a way to bridge this gap. I support this project. I support this motion. There's another aspect of this that I wanted to point out. There are 8 parcels, excuse me, that abut the northern property line of the target property. The 2 parcels that one of the members of the public spoke to, she correctly points out that those 2 properties are immediately adjacent to where the garden center is. Now, here's what I would point out, and it's not so much a rebuttal, it's an observation. Of the 8 properties that align along that northern property line, 2 of them are hers. The third one is actually an address on College Avenue, and that's the third one. To me, those 3 properties enjoy the quietest adjacency to the target property because the parking in that area is exclusively for customers, and because of its location is probably the least used parking area. The 5 properties to the north that abut the property line are all next to customer parking, and I observed it today. There's cars there. Of course, it's a busy parking lot. It's a very busy Target store. It's a great shopping center. And those properties have more of a noise impact. And those people aren't here. They're not commenting to us. So I'm very comfortable supporting this motion. I feel like the conditions of approval that deal with the public's concerns along that northern property line have been addressed. And I'm satisfied that, that the target management understands what's at stake, takes the residents' concerns seriously, and genuinely wants to be responsive to those. So again, I'll be supporting this motion and want to thank staff for the work that they've done on this project. Thanks.
Okay, Commissioner Torje, do you want to comment on your motion, or are you good to go?
I'm good to go.
Okay, Julie, roll call vote unless there's any, I don't see it. Oh, Kadarius, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I just threw my hand up at the end. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to state that I am in support of this motion. I just had a couple of comments, more so staff related to my initial line of questioning. And I suspect that the response from that Ms. Halligan provided and Ms. Lee as well, Mr. Lee provided in regards to why we did the approach to this. But I just think we should probably take a look at those parking requirements as it relates to how we do deviations, we do parking deviations, and how this particular approach initially with the floor area ratio may have trapped us into a bit of a kind of a nuanced situation to where we are now requiring parking spaces that are there to become operational when there is clearly no need. I would also argue that the garden center, which was a retail operation, which have promoted more demand for cars, should have probably been accounted for in that initial square footage, which would have increased the parking, which would initially reduce the need for those parking corrals. So that's just something that was brought to my attention and just didn't. I just, when I was looking at it, just didn't really understand why we did this, because initially I was like, oh, we'll just do a parking deviation in addition to this. I think my final things are kind of related to what Commissioner Zick stated. In addition, regarding the city's request, I noticed, I wanted to remove or request additional information about this project, just because it has a deep history, and I wanted to watch the meeting, and I typically do that, just through the online links. That wasn't an available option for me this time. And I understood that I could request the minutes, but sometimes the minutes are more so hours, and so they're not really, capturing the nuance that's really discussed. So you need that sometimes when you pick that up in the videos that is not really caught in the written piece. And so I just wish I had that capacity to do so. But given the time, it was a holiday weekend. When we get this, we got to read these reports. We had a general plan piece, we had a housing piece, then we have this piece, which in all three are equally important. And you have to really kind of identify what you're going to give your attention to and prioritize. I don't always like being in that position. So those are my comments as it relates to those items, because I want the city, the community to also have access to whatever information that they want to in order to tell us how to make an informed decision or question us in any way on the decision-making process. So thanks, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to comment on this. I do support the motion, but I think we've satisfied the requirements of the community based on our adjustments to the conditions of approval. And I look forward to this being a more successful operation based off of the comments that I've heard tonight from Target's leadership. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Russell.
Yes, first of all, I want to thank the staff for the reports and for giving me some additional information I requested today. I also support this from the perspective that I think that Target has done a good job of addressing the issues of the community. And also just to keep in mind that I think if we look at the tax revenue for the second quarter of this year, Target is going to be one of our stars. Brick and mortar stores are having more and more trouble staying in business, and that we have a situation where Target's actually saying we need to bring more product in because we've got a greater demand, whether it be online, which I think, a lot of people are buying things more and more online, even if they're coming into the store. There's a lot of reasons why they don't want things dropped off at their houses. Anything that we can do to support a large scale business like this without having a serious impact on the greater community, I think is important. So I'm very much in support of this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no one else, Julie, roll call, please.
Okay, Chair Jericho,
Aye.
Commissioner Colbert,
Aye.
Commissioner Russell,
Aye.
Commissioner Perkins,
Aye.
Commissioner Torje,
Aye.
Commissioner Zick.
Aye, thank you.
That motion carried 6-0 with Vice Chair Harlan absent.
Okay, and that decision is final unless appealed to the City Council within 7 days. Thank you all very much, staff, for your effort. And commissioners, as usual, great work, good questions. Departmental reports, Mr. Mejia, do we have any public services report tonight?
Mr. Chairman, I do not have any reports tonight, but I do have an announcement that tomorrow is the Parks, Arts and Community Services Commission meeting. And we're going to be presenting the 1 year and 5 year CIPs for their review and their input.
I remember those meetings. Yeah.
Yes.
Very good. Thank you very much. And that is an important. I encourage the community to tune into those because unlike the Planning Commission, the Parks Commission actually does prioritize and recommend park projects in the CIP to the City Council. So that's a good meeting. That's a good meeting to watch. Thank you very much, Mr. Mejia. Mr. Curtis, Development Services.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just real quick, an update on a couple items that the City Council was considering in the last meeting and the previous meeting. The City Council considered whether to place a couple items on the November ballot, one regarding potential changes to Measure Y, one regarding potential changes to Measure X. Ultimately, the City Council directed staff to move forward with bringing forth an item for them to consider regarding some potential changes to Measure X, and determined not to move forward with anything regarding Measure Y. So just want to give you a quick heads up on that.
Okay, Mr. Curtis, I appreciate that very much. Mr. Preziosi, City Attorney report.
Chair Jericho, I have no report tonight.
Okay, thank you very much. Staff, thank you very much. Julie, as usual, thank you all very much. Jennifer, we didn't get to hear from you tonight, but thanks for attending. And we'll stand adjourned to our regularly scheduled meeting of Monday, June 8th. Good night.